Welcome to the Galen Trombley Show. You can find me on Facebook at Galen Trombley, on Instagram at Galen Trombley, and on YouTube at Galen Trombley. Spelling GalenTrombley. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Galen Trombley Show.
Yeah, whatever you want, man.
So we're live now, Scott. So so the table, I never thought of that. You're the first person to come up with the idea that this table bounces off sound and doesn't soften the. I didn't even think about that. I was thinking for like aesthetics. I was thinking for the ease of putting, because I don't know if I could really drill through this, nor would I want to. But what kind of material is this?
I don't know. It looks like it's resin, like it's cast. It doesn't. It's not heavy
like
enough to be granite.
It's like a plasticky thing.
Yeah.
It's not probably the best surface, but I want to get. I've talked to Ryan Lee about it, and we have to get serious about it. But actually building like a proper table in here, a little longer.
Yep.
So we can have two people on each side, and then making it a little bit more lengthwise, and trying to hide some of the cords, so we're not getting this pocket. So this is pretty much very minimal style of stuff on the table.
Yep.
So
that makes complete sense.
So Scott, tell people about this chair that I'm sitting in right now, because we had talked about it. So I'm actually in a brand new chair right now. So if you find that I fall off the mic here, Scott will tell you why. It's pretty cool though. Right now, I've been on it for about 5 minutes.
All right, so it's a chair from a company called Core 360. And it's a chair that was designed by a friend of mine out of Burlington, Vermont, named Dr. Turner Osler. He and his son, Lex or Alexis, have this company that they put together. They wanted to, how do I put this? They want to revolutionize sitting. You know, sitting is the new smoking, is what a lot of people are saying. So you see this explosion in desks that go up and down, and standing desks, and desks with treadmills. Well, Dr. Osler, who is a former trauma surgeon and an instructor, a professor at UVM's medical school, developed this stool with a rocker. And the rocker, I don't remember, it's a very long, like dihedral, some strange name of the geometric shape. But the object is to keep your core engaged while you're sitting, so that it's like you're getting a workout, which you're probably getting right now.
You can feel it.
Your spine is ramrod straight up like it's supposed to be, carrying your whole body. And but the chairs are fantastic because you get a little bit of a sort of a workout, but it's engaging your core. You don't get loose. And people, Gina, who does their design and marketing and stuff, and she talks to people, and their stories are like, my back pain went away because you're engaging your core. Very similar to the impact of CrossFit, where people start to do core workouts, and then the chronic pains from traditional cultural constructs of like sitting at a desk all day long go away.
It feels like I'm on a balance ball. That's what I was saying before. And you instantly sit down, and it just feels like you're rocking on a balance ball. But I can already feel like like you said, my hips are open. I feel like I have more of a, pelvis opening. But then also, I can feel my spine is more stacked than it's ever been. And ideally, it's like, you can't, people listening, it's like I'm sitting a little bit above a normal like parallel squat, so my legs aren't flat. They're angled up a little bit, and I feel like I'm high right now sitting. So I feel like I'm sitting almost on a tall bar stool, but the bar stool's slightly angled down and has almost like a ball and socket kind of thing where it's rotating on top, and I feel like, again, it literally feels like I'm on an exercise ball.
Yeah, the way to think about it, and in fact, Turner has this great project called the butt-on chairs that he does for kids, where imagine you've got a flat plate on top of a tennis ball. That plate can rock forwards and backwards and side to side. And that's exactly what that rocker allows you to do, up to a point, and then it stops. Mm-hmm. So that way you don't fall out of the chair.
You almost can't go back.
Yeah.
Because the angle just goes down, so you have that tendency, even if you, like I just tried going back, and I instantly want to just fall back forward.
And also that particular model has a little sort of a hook, a little rise in the back that sits on your, I think, a sit bone, so that it keeps you your awareness of your body on the chair, so you know how far back you are on it. That way you don't slide off forwards, backwards, or to the side. At least that's my perception of it.
It feels like right now that when you look at it and first get on it, feels like you're going to fall off. But then as you sit on it, like, there's no way I'm falling off this thing. It just feels... It's pretty wild right now. I'm getting used to it. It feels like I'm like in a whole new experience. So how long you been doing photos for them?
So a couple of years now. I had bumped into Turner at one of these sort of tech conferences gigs over in Burlington, and he had a couple of the chairs out. And I was like, oh, Turner, I want to take some pictures of the chair because it's very artistic and beautiful. The rocker is this beautiful glossy red with the black chair. Mm-hmm. And some of the models have wood legs, and some are steamed and pressed plywood, so they have this really elegant form. And he gave me one. I took some pictures. He liked it, and so over the years, I've just shot more and more pictures, and so it's been fun. And I proselytize it because, I got Gina engaged with him to help do design work, mm-hmm. and so his company has been really doing well because of that.
And it's all out of Burlington?
Yep.
Is this because I looked up their website at the time, and they only had a couple chairs on, mm-hmm. so it's like a very minimal selection of products.
Yeah.
Is it still the same?
Well, it changes. So, it's funny at home. I feel like I have the museum of the Core 360 chairs. Some of the early models I have in the basement, they don't sell anymore. Where instead of a cup, it's a flat plane with a cushion on top. And in other cases, some are on wheels, some are not. So there's lots of different models, but they change. And I think they're getting ready to come out with a new model soon because they've been trying to book another photo shoot. So I've got more chairs.
So they just keep revamping the system.
Yeah, and making improvements. Like in some cases, some of the early versions, the rocker would allow you to rock so far to the side or forward you'd fall off the chair. So now they have bumpers mm-hmm. that will go in there to stop you. Also, as they tried to, one of the things is if you want to revolutionize a cultural construct sitting down, that's a pretty broad thing. So they tried to put some of the stools in schools. And so there were requirements. They don't want kids' fingers to get mashed inside. So they're starting to add these other components to the design to make it better. I don't know what's coming down the roadmap. I haven't talked to them in a while.
How long, you said about half hour before people... how long can people sit in these chairs?
Some people sit in them all day long. Turner's idea is that, if you do one thing too long of anything is probably bad for mm-hmm. you. And so the way that I've incorporated it is I'll sit in the chair for maybe half an hour and then stand for maybe 15 minutes, then maybe go walk around and try and constantly vary the sort of structure of my body with the use of the chair.
Well, I was thinking for podcasting.
Oh, yeah.
You sit down for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours and talk. It feels like sitting down. My chairs are terrible. They're probably the worst chairs that you could have for this. They came with a set and I haven't just splurged yet because I want to get a new table. But if I got these, do you think if people sat on these for 2 to 3 hours, they wouldn't think twice about it?
Maybe not. It depends on the person.
Yeah.
If they have a strong core, they probably would be much easier for them. If they have a weak core, it might be much harder.
I'm curious to see because if I get we see about a half hour. I want to see about a half hour. I want to see before how long I notice where I'm I got to get onto a regular chair.
Yeah.
I'll save.
And it will happen. You're going to get tired because you're holding your upper body tight, where in a chair you typically don't.
This is the most work I've ever done in a podcast. We're 7 minutes in.
You're breaking out in a cold sweat.
You see, I'm drinking coffee. I'm drinking water right now, profusely sweating. No, I think it's cool, and like I said, I want to eventually probably connect with those guys.
Yeah.
Probably later this year and just kind of check it out. They have a warehouse over there.
They use a system of there are these companies where that will. You buy the material and then they assemble it and ship it on site on demand. And so it keeps you from having to have a warehouse full of stuff. They train people to do it. So they have this institution, this vendor over there that does that for them. So they don't have a giant warehouse, but they have all the parts. So when people order ones, I need a small one, I need a tall one, I need a short one. I want one with red, I want one with black. They can just pick and choose. The company will assemble it and ship it for them. And
It's pretty cool.
And you check out his TED Talk on it. So,
oh, really?
Yeah.
It's
really
Core, and it's QOR 360.
QOR 360, Core 360.
I'll have to check it out because I have looked at it before, and like I said, it's been since you first made the recommendation. It's been probably a year and a half to 2 years.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Maybe longer, it seems, but
it's changed a lot. They've gotten much bigger. They have a much bigger team working on it, and it's fantastic.
Well, the thing is, I've had pain kind of down the spine angle or spine area, probably from mid back upper to low, mid back, and sometimes it radiates down to the lower spine.
Yep.
So I've had that for a while, and it just I can already feel everything just almost like stretching. You know when you get like like a tight muscle, and you kind of just stretch away, and you kind of feel that pull, and it's like almost like a little bit of relief. I can feel that right now in my spine. I'm like, wow, this is like the best my spine's felt sitting.
Yep.
Just it seems like, I don't know, it's cool.
It really highlights your flexibility as well. I was shooting the video on the sizing for kids and for adults with Eli. And so we put him on the chair and then me on the chair, and we rocked our hips, and you can totally see like a child's, your flexibility.
They're like Gumby.
Is exactly. Yeah. But your flexibility will improve because you're being forced to engage it all the time. And
well, the stretching, so I've gotten away from stretching recently. When I was stretching a lot, it's night and day.
Oh, yeah.
No pain. You can just, everything you do just is like, you're so loose, and you sleep better. And it's kind of one where I always kick myself. I'm like, how do you don't get out of stretching? Like always mobilize, always. And do you do a lot of that?
I used to do a lot more, particularly when I was in martial arts. Stretching is a massive part of it because of what you're doing with your body. And in fact, that's where I met Turner. Dr. Osler and I studied Aikido together, and with his son.
Over in Burlington?
In Burlington.
Are you still doing that?
No, not now.
Weren't you doing jiu-jitsu for a while?
I was. Then the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So everything's been put on hold. And right now, my schedule is kind of full with work. The company I work for merged, got bought out by another company. So that's a whole, a giant issue with that of additional responsibilities and stuff. But then my son is older, so he's in baseball now. And so my calendar now is full outside of work.
What age are the two kids?
So Eli's 9 and Eleanor's 5. 4 years apart.
Yeah, because I'm always like, I look at people that have kids that are a little bit older and like, where are they? Because I can see the writing on the wall. I know what's going to happen. But that starts adding in complexity. That's what we're finding right now. It's just like trying to get everything done in a day. It's impossible.
It's hard. It's impossible.
I've been on a big kick right now of trying to figure out time-wise, trying to maximize like the time I have and try to be purposeful in the time I have, and it's tough. I mean, trying to learn how to use your time wisely is tough. It's a skill, and there's a few people I've been trying to follow of like, how do they do it? How do they leverage their time? How do they focus? How do they plan? How do they prioritize? And it's a challenge right now.
Well, we live in a culture that thinks it rewards multitasking, and it doesn't. It's called context switching. So if you're doing one thing and you need to switch gears and do something else, you're not going to be able, you can't switch gears very rapidly. Yet we think we can. We think we can be on the cell phone and watch the kids and mow the lawn, get something else done. And as humans, we're not wired that way, but we have a false sense of confidence that we do. And that's part of it. But if you were to say, all right, for the next hour, I'm just going to play with my son, and that's it, nothing else. And for him, it's wonderful. For you, it's wonderful because you get to concentrate on it. But we just don't do enough of that in this culture.
Yeah, and that's the hardest thing right now is because I'm not good at multitasking. Yep. So if you were to talk to me and I'm on my phone, I'd just be like, yeah, Scott, just a sec. And I think it's human nature is that we focus. And people that I think they say they're good at multitasking are just trying to fool themselves, because I'm just like my day to day, like I find my sweet spot. So I found this problem the other day is I had too much going on from beginning of the day to the end of the day. And what I didn't have, and someone put this perfectly, I had no time to create. And I was doing, but I wasn't creating. And there's a total difference because I wasn't putting my mind on a project. Most of my day today is on autopilot. I know how to do it, like filling it, like email, talking to someone, putting out a fire, like boom, boom, boom. It's just happening. But then it's like, okay, sit down. Now let's try to brainstorm and think and process, like, where do you want to go? What's the next task, challenge? That time to go over all that and just think deeply on a subject. My sweet spot's 4 hours. And some people are different, but people are like, oh, I can do it all in a half hour. I'm like, I can't. It takes me a solid, almost, I would say 45 minutes to an hour to process the information and get my head kind of around what I want to do. Then it's probably another hour of going deep into it. Then another hour of like working on it. And then in the last hour, I can feel myself like basically getting enough of it. My brain's overworked at that point. I find I just kind of fizz out and I need to do something different. But 4 hours, and that's uninterrupted. That's like nobody walk in my door. Don't call me. Don't text me. I'm not checking something. I just want 4 hours of just on that.
You have to. I mean, any creative pursuit or brainstorming requires large amounts of time to process historical things that have happened, things that you're going to bring to bear, and what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the solution? You see it in my sort of job doing sort of account management and also doing technical work on accounts. I have to do analysis. I have to set aside 3 hours at a time to analyze the data for the account. And it's not just, X number of pieces of content or data showed up. It's like, no, you have to really look at each piece and say, is this valid or not? Did it work for the client? Did it solve the client's problem? Did I make a mistake in the configuration? Is it there or not? And you can't do that in 15 minutes. You really need long periods of time to optimize it. And you see that also in the creative arts. Very, very few people will walk into a room and be super creative to solve a problem. Generally, they have to mull it over and work on it over a period of time to come up with a really unique, interesting solution. Neil deGrasse Tyson has a great quote about it. He goes, if you really want to be creative, you have to be lazy at other things. Because
was that something you just said the other day in Rogan?
Yeah.
I listened to that. And
it's a good podcast.
The reason I actually listened to the podcast, and it's on Spotify.
Yeah.
So you had the video. And I love Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah,
and some of the stuff he came up with, like, and we'll get in the space, but some of the stuff was like, what? And it just like it makes your brain so small or feel so small. Yeah. But that was one of the things, and he said that. And the moment you just said that, and I'll prove it to you later. But I actually took a screen record, play it back and screen record about 40 seconds, and he talked about that. He goes, you can't, and that's where I got the create part. Because you need time. That's the guy who said it was. You need time to do and create, and the create stuff means you punt everything else.
Absolutely.
And I just don't do that, and I know I'm at a stage in my life and work that I need that more than I need other stuff, and it's weird. You spend all this time trying to get busy, and then you spend all this time not to be busy, so you can do stuff to get busy again. It's like the cycle.
It is. Well, in graduate school, I had a really amazing instructor, and he once told me, he goes, yeah, you can get a day job. But if you're going to do creative work, you need to set aside studio time. And you walk in that studio at X o'clock and you leave at X o'clock and you do nothing else but work on yourself. You work on your art. You might be playing music, you might be painting, taking pictures, doesn't matter. But you need long tracks of time to be able to get into that sort of flow state, which I think is critical in a mental place where you're not thinking so much as processing and doing subconsciously and then arriving at what the next steps are. Photography has that sort of magic to it. You spend years saying, how do I be a better photographer? Well, I need a better lens or a better camera, or maybe I need to get a darkroom. I need to make a better print. And pretty soon the tools fall away. And then what you're doing is you're solving for concepts. I need to make someone happy. I need to make them look good. How do I do that? So what you're doing is you're practicing on making the tools not be a hindrance, but just be like your subconscious. They help support and construct your ideas so that you can arrive at the solution much more rapidly in a much more elegant fashion.
When you were, when you say create an art, I mean, you're mostly photography, or did you do other stuff? Did you paint? The reason I ask this is because I kind of have the Scott Brightwell rule. There's probably a million things you do that I don't know. But were you painting? Did you do music, anything like that, or was it always photography?
So a bunch of stories around that. I come from a very musically gifted family, except for my father and I. So when I was growing up, my mom was like, you have to play piano. I was forced to play piano for years, and I hated it. And one day I was like, I gave up. I said, I'm not playing piano anymore. I'm going to go play baseball. I was the first athlete in my family, But I think I never really had a talent for any of that. But I became seduced by photography because it was technical, all the little gears and knobs and whistles, but it also made something you could appreciate. And I really liked that. And it was hard. It took a long time to get good at. But when I went to school and went to college, I studied engineering for a while. I studied biology and ended up in art history, where I wanted to know the background of the decisions for what beautiful was coming from. Now, I never took art classes in the formal way, never took painting, but in graduate school, I did take other creative pursuits that were very similar to photography, like printmaking, lithography, things that were process-oriented for making art objects. And my favorite of all of them was sculpture, welding. It's like using the world's largest hot glue gun, and you get to use steel, and there's sparks, and people get scared. It's wonderful.
That was what you worked with?
Yeah. Yeah. So my thesis exhibition in grad school was I had these giant photos on the wall that had been scratched and painted on, and I had put prints on top of prints on top of prints, and they were like 40 inches tall by, I don't know, 10, 15 feet long. And then I had pieces of sculpture where I went to junkyards and would get big cut off pieces of steel, bring them into the studio, and then weld them together to mimic the shapes that I was photographing.
Was it to appear that way, or was it almost to make it, when you get like a model, or you get like what's called a model, like a car, but it's a smaller scale?
Yeah.
Was it kind of like model. That, where you're trying to make it look like something, and then you took it maybe a bigger structure, made it look smaller, or vice versa?
Think of it in terms like I wanted to get a viewer to enter the space and be in my headspace. So one of the things I was always fascinated by was the horizon line. We use it in photography as an index, a reference point. Buildings don't look right unless the horizon is parallel to the sides of the photo. But the horizon can also be a metaphor for other things. That was the end of the world for Western Europeans as they traveled out in the ocean until they had a sextant, until they had other tools. They couldn't go beyond the horizon. If they went beyond land, they would be lost. So in the studio, I would take pieces of steel and attach them to the wall and make an artificial horizon. Then I would take photos and put them above and below the horizon. Photos above might be the future. Photos below might be the past, where the horizon suddenly is an index marker to the user in the space. And it's not just...
And this is all man-made. You made this...
Yeah.
Out of the steel? Or
Mm-hmm. I did steel pipes along the walls, and then I made big prints of stuff like... I took pictures that I shot of my father, and then pictures of my father when he was my age from the 60s, and I would put them side by side, and sort of to bring together the passage of time between people and the relationships between, fathers and sons, which that's a whole other genre of chats and stories and stuff. But, I think that's what art does. Art should make you question the things around you, and it can be beautiful, and sometimes it can be ugly.
So what was the flow state like for you with photography?
Oh, there's lots of it. So growing up in the Deep South with the hot summers, the darkroom was a respite because it was some cases it was the only room in the house that had air conditioning. So it's like, great, I'll go in the darkroom and work for a few hours. And
you had one at your house?
Oh, yeah, I've had lots of them. So I built one in high school in the bathroom of our house. And then when I got to college, that was my first job, I worked running a darkroom for a wedding photographer named Scott Brower and Ann Dickinson. And I did that for several years, working in their darkroom. And that's where I really learned, cut my teeth.
Was that Florida State?
Yeah, it was at Florida State in Tallahassee. And that was where I really learned how to make a print, how to process film, medium format. And that's when my sort of knowledge of that process really took off. But I spent years making prints for other people. And you learn a lot about how other photographers treat subjects. You learn a lot about textures, quality of light, and I loved the process. You could take a piece of paper, has nothing on it, shine light on it, and run it through a couple of chemical baths, and then you have this work of art that is beautiful. And you can stick it on the wall and appreciate it for the next 100 years.
Do you still do that with darkrooms?
No, I don't. There's no need to, or there's very little need to.
I mean, is it more of kind of like the romantic side of doing it more so than practical?
I think so. Well, up until about maybe 10 years ago, digital printing didn't have the longevity of a traditional print. I'd say 20 years ago. And what I mean by that is you could take a traditional print, photographic print. So there's two kinds. There's paper, there's a sort of a fiber-based and then plastic-based papers. And they each have a longevity. The certain materials, one's based on wood fibers, you expose it to light with silver halide and develop it, and it can have a lifespan of 250 years if it's properly kept. An RC print, maybe 75 years, maybe 50 years, a little less. But printing digital images, the longevity of them was always capped at a couple of years, and you couldn't have them out in the open because the UV light would make them fade. So there have been revolutions in the technology that allow pigment-based printing that now will eclipse and have a longer lifespan than traditional prints. And, I got to say, I don't miss the chemicals at all. I miss the process. I enjoyed that. But the chemicals were pretty nasty. And over time, I developed contact dermatitis because I was always getting, acids and bases on my skin and not getting it washed off fully. So there was some of the side effects of that.
So, start to finish, how long before a print would be actually, or in a dark room, you bring the print in,
yeah,
and then before it's developed? What's that whole process?
So I used to throw parties in college where I would get a camera and a bunch of rolls of film, and I would shoot a bunch of pictures of my friends, and then I would go into the dark room, process the film, dry it, and make everybody prints before the end of the party. So
a couple hours?
Yeah, at most. Okay. So to process a roll of film takes, 8, 10, 15, probably 20 minutes. And the longest amount of time is, waiting on it to dry. Once it's dry, you stick it in the enlarger, expose light through it, and go through the chemical baths. It's about 10 more minutes. So you can really go from shot to print in less than an hour if you're really diligent and working quick.
And that's when you see it on a clothesline, they're all hanging.
Exactly.
That's just the drying process.
Yep.
So really you can see the image before it dries.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Isn't it funny back then that was a thing? To see yourself on camera, and now it's instant.
Instant.
And now I take photos hey, can you get a photo? You take 5, 6, 7 photos and just say, well, your eyes are open in one of them, take it. And you don't even think twice about it. You delete. Back then it was imagine getting those photos, God, someone's eyes closed.
It's expensive. It was expensive.
My
parents still give me grief that, God damn, we spent so much money on film that you shot in high school. And I loved every minute of it. I can't thank them enough for it. But I will say the digital world has really changed that because you can shoot a lot, you throw away a lot. But the technology also gives you the ability to do things you could never do before, like image stacking, taking 30 or 40 images of a star cluster or of a bug, and then you combine them in the computer and you get an image that you physically can't see with your eye, but it is amazing.
So I got to ask, the solar eclipse we just had.
Yeah, this morning.
Yes. That's what it was, solar.
It was a partial solar eclipse, yes.
So the photos you took with Eli, those were this morning?
Yeah.
That was incredible.
Oh, well, thank you.
How zoomed in were you on that? Because
that's a good question.
Because the moon is in front, so the moon is passing between the sun and the Earth.
Yes.
Okay, and then what we see is almost a crescent moon, which is really the sun. But it looks like a massive crescent moon.
Exactly.
So what time was that this morning? And give us kind of the whole rundown of that.
Sure. So I love eclipses. If you go to my Instagram page, you'll see the very first image I have is of the full eclipse that I got to photograph a few years ago down in Tennessee at my grandparents' house.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And a full eclipse being in totality is an experience everyone should have. It's amazing.
That was when they had the glasses. People okay.
Yep. So I've always been a fan of them. I saw 2 of them when I was growing up, and I was like, this is amazing. You're standing there, and all of a sudden it gets dark, and all the cows lay down, and all the birds stop chirping. They think it's night, and then it gets bright again.
So that happened when the sun was completely behind the moon?
Yes. So the moon, that's called totality. And that's not what happened this morning. So this morning was a partial, it was what they call an annular eclipse, a ring eclipse, not annular as in annual once a year. And the totality for that eclipse was far off, way up in Canada and in the Arctic. But here we had visibility into a portion of it. And that's sort of, I got up this morning at 4 a.m., got Eli up at 4:30, and we jumped in the car and ran over. And I have a little tiny sort of portable telescope called it's a refractor, and it's very. I got it used online for a couple $100, and it's designed specifically for photography. And then it's in 35 millimeter terms, with my camera, it was about, say, 400 millimeters would be the equivalent.
Okay.
And then I set it up on a tripod, and then I have a special solar filter that I put on the front of it. If you don't have a solar filter, a telescope will concentrate the sun's rays and will blind you permanently. So you have to be very careful of that. But I'd used this telescope to photograph other eclipses before, so I have a system set up that works real well. So I set it up, and funny enough, I go out to Valcor Brewing to the bridge there and goes and do photography of like comets and stuff with Ed Gunther.
Oh, yeah.
And usually there's no one there but him and I and, the raccoons. Today, there were a dozen people there hanging out, taking pictures.
Was that because that was like a certain time it had to be done in that certain time
Had to be
period?
done in that window, exactly. And so we're all hanging out, and Eli's jumping around on rocks, and the sun comes up, and it's already started, the eclipse. And so I took a bunch of pictures and was there for about an hour, give or take. It was a long time. It was nice.
For it to pass.
Yeah, so as the sun rises up, then the moon moves across it. And if you look at all the photos, like when I had imported them into Lightroom, and you like scroll through them, you can see the moon moving across the sun. But because of the clouds and haze, there were problems with the images. I'm really happy. They came out really interesting.
Yeah.
But I was really hoping for a little bit clearer conditions.
I mean, to me, looking at it, I'm like, this looks cool. I mean, obviously, like more trained eye that I get.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
There's a few things going on, but I just saw it. I'm like, that's so crazy.
Yeah. I'm hoping to build some time lapses with them so that because I shot a little bit of video, but the telescope shook a little bit during it because there was a lot of wind and the trains were going by, and the train would go by and shake the ground, and it's like I can't image when that's happening. But I have maybe 600 shots that I will tile into a time lapse at some point and get that put together.
So how fast are you clicking this?
Well, it depends.
Is it like already preset to have like a burst kind of effect?
Well, it depends. So when the sun first came up with the solar filter on, it's still very, very dark. So I have to crank up the sensitivity of the camera real high. And I don't like to do that because that makes it harder to make a big print. I shoot with the idea of making a big print. I might not always make prints, but that's the idea. And then as the sun gets higher and higher, then it produces more light gets to the camera, and then I can lower the ISO down. So the first a couple dozen shots, I would shoot one every 3 or 4 seconds, and it would be a longer exposure. Then as it got higher and higher and brighter, I started shooting a lot more often, one every 2 seconds. And then the exposures were much shorter, so there was happening more in rapid succession. And my camera has, like most modern mirrorless cameras have the ability to set it on interval timing, where, it'll fire a frame, wait 3 seconds, fire a frame, wait 3 seconds, and you dictate what the wait time is, you dictate how many frames to shoot. So
can you also adjust the exposure and the ISO and all that as that's happening?
Oh yeah, but in astrophotography you don't want to do that. You want to keep the exposure exactly the same, so that you can focus stack in the computer. It's a lot easier if the exposures are all identical, and then you manipulate them in the computer rather than doing it in the camera, because then you might. The sensor might make a bad reading and it might throw stuff way off, and you want it to be as consistent as possible from start to finish.
So I saw this. Do you follow on Instagram the NASA and ISS?
Yes.
So they posted something the other day, and I'm not going to have the numbers in front of me, so I'm going to wing this off the top of my head. They showed a galaxy that was... And when you start thinking of space and then you really get to the point where it makes you sick and you're just like, why do I even let my mind get that big and try to comprehend it? So then I'm taking some of this from Neil deGrasse Tyson so this image was 120 million, it was the galaxy, 120 million light years away. Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting there and I'm at home, my Gina. So I always, so we both got Ginas, Gina versus Gena. So me and Gina are home and I show her, I'm like, look at this is incredible. And I go, I wonder how fast a light year is, because I don't know. You hear light years, so I'm going through and I might butcher. I'm going to definitely butcher the numbers, but I think it's like 100 and something thousand miles per second. Mm-hmm. It's some crazy number. And so I was doing the math. I'm like 100 and something per second. This is 120 million light years away. So like second. And I'm like, my mind's already blown. Mm-hmm. And then I go, well, how is that comparable? Like, what's a light year to a human year? Mm-hmm. And I think it was 57,000 years. So 57,000 human years, or 30-something thousand human years, is the equivalent of one light year. Yeah. And I started doing them. I'm like... The scale of the universe is off the charts. It's unfathomable. You can't even imagine it. You can't imagine it. And then when Neil deGrasse Tyson said, well, what's your... He goes, yeah. So he goes, the problem is, he goes, that's what you're seeing is 120 million light years away. But that's, in theory, and correct me if I'm wrong, that is what it looked like 120 million light years ago. So he goes, the universe is expanding. So that's not 120 million light years from here. That's way beyond that.
Yep.
But he goes, we don't go that much in the weeds. But he goes, it's so big. What you're seeing is, I mean, so long ago that, and we're just seeing that image today, and it blows. I'm like, oh my god! And then he started talking about if you were to get into like a spaceship, talking about, was it quantum theory? Mm-hmm. About how you could like go out at a certain speed and for 6 months, come back in 6 months, and the Earth might have aged like 100 million years, but you've aged relatively only 1 year.
Yeah.
And I thought about that. I'm like, how is that possible? Is that because of the gravitational pulls and stuff? Like,
you're getting into the physics that I don't understand.
Like I started listening to that. I'm like this seems like time travel. And he goes, time travel, like he basically was like, time travel exists. It just, like by science, that's how it would happen.
Yeah, but by scale that we can't do yet.
No.
But conceptually, even trying to fathom it is it's amazing. It's impossible. You know, you're like, okay, it's like, think in terms of what is the speed of light. So the sun is what, 93 million miles away? All right. Yeah. So the light from the sun takes 7 minutes to get here. 7 minutes.
Wow.
The sun could blow up and we wouldn't know about it for 7 minutes. So, but that's how fast light travels. And then you think, okay, 1 light year. Okay. 100 light years, and suddenly the scale you lose any sense of being able to index that against something of a human scale.
How far away from the sun? You said 93
million miles, 96 million miles, something like that.
That's actual, that's physical, like
million miles.
That's
our
miles. Okay.
Yeah.
Because the crazy thing is like the fact that you can't look at the sun. The fact that you have to wear sunscreen, the fact that you have to do all this stuff, and it's 93 million, and the sun is relatively small.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that blows my mind too. When you start going to like stars and planets, and my favorite planet's Betelgeuse because I like the name, but like you start looking at these. I mean, the sun is the closest star.
Yeah.
And then it's that hot. I'm like, I can't imagine when they do those, when the planets get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they show the relative size, and finally like. Our sun is a dot on this bigger sun, and I'm like, oh my god, I got to sit down. Like this is.
You know, it's funny. I wish Ed was here because this is his sweet spot.
Ed is amazing when I talk. He's coming on in a few weeks, and
that's good.
He just it like rolls off his tongue, and he's just like I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson. Yeah, that's how it is. And I'm sitting there like jaw on the floor, and then Ed gives that like Ed laugh and just like you know it's
he's great like that. I helped him set up an outreach with telescopes a few weeks ago when what was it, Beekmantown or West Shazy? One of the schools was able to talk to folks on the ISS.
Oh yeah, Beekmantown.
Yeah, Beekmantown. Yeah. So he and I went out and we set up a couple telescopes and had a little chat and talked about astronomy, and we had some models and stuff. And one of the things he did to talk about scale was he took a kid and he goes, okay, you're the Scott, you're going to be the sun because you're bald head. And I'm like, great. And so then he got another kid and he goes, you're going to be Mercury and Venus. And he goes, we're going to walk out in the relative distance we are in reality as to how far away things are. And we didn't even get we got 4 planets in. We got to Mars and then Jupiter, and then suddenly there were people running off into the woods to make the next sort of distance. And it's like, we have no way to put that system in a way in which we can physically understand it, usually on a day-to-day basis.
Well, did you get to talk to the astronaut, or you were part of the presentation?
I wasn't part of that. This was something after hours where we got together out in a park so people could look through telescopes at stars that were coming out in the darkness.
Well, and again, like how long is it? If we talk about going to Mars, it's like 7 months to get to Mars.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. And then, I mean, the fact that you can see Mars, which is pretty cool. Like when you see like certain days and like Mars, like the red, you can see it kind of red. And was it you that took photos of it? Mars?
I haven't taken any of Mars, not in a long time.
Or was it Ed? Maybe Ed
Maybe
did?
been Ed.
So someone took photos of, it might have been Ed, because I think Ed has acknowledged that he's got the telescopes, not necessarily the photography skills, so maybe it was Ed. But it was one where you could still see it. It was pretty sharp. And he sent me a couple of the moon that he took that were incredible. And I saw another one. So Jupiter has how many moons? 16?
16, a bunch. It has a bunch.
Is it more than 16?
I don't remember. It's between Jupiter and Saturn, they have so many moons, and they keep discovering them. So I don't know what the final count is.
So they said a moon. I was looking at this yesterday. A moon is a satellite to the or whatever that planet is. The Earth, they said, is the largest moon in our solar system relative to its planet, size-wise. And the moon is about the width of Australia.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Ballpark.
Yeah.
And they're talking about this one planet, Jupiter's moon. The moon itself is larger than Mercury.
Yeah.
Which, again, blows my mind how big Jupiter is.
One of the fascinating things that I read was like Jupiter, our solar system works to have life because of the supergas giants like Saturn and Jupiter, because they suck debris away from the inner planets. So it makes it safer for us to live here. And over time, that debris coagulates together and becomes those other planets, those moons of the gas giants. Is there a proper name for our solar system? I've always heard it called our solar system.
Yeah, it's not like the sun solar system or some weird, because you have like the Milky Way galaxy, which is, we're part of that.
Yep.
But the Milky Way galaxy is comprised of a bunch of solar systems, right? So we're one of how many in the
billions?
In that galaxy is one of, however, what's beyond a galaxy?
Well, there's galaxies and there's clusters of galaxies.
So we're part of the cluster.
Yep. And then you're getting into the realm of where my astronomy falls apart. Most of my astronomy is about image making, but it's interesting that you have a single, like a galaxy, a Milky Way galaxy, but then you have clusters, groups of galaxies that are attracted to each other by gravity, and then there are what is it called? A supercluster. There's another name for it where you have giant clusters of galaxies in a region, how it's described in space. You really need an astronomer on here.
It's crazy. I wanted to get the lady from Plattsburgh State, I think. There's an astronomy department, but there was someone that runs like the planetarium and and I wanted to try to get her on. I'll have to try again on that, because I love hearing people talk about it, because like it just blows your mind how big things are.
Oftentimes, I think people, and this is really what Ed does well in that outreach. It's like, get someone to look through a telescope at night of something interesting, and then start to ratchet away at their misunderstanding of the universe, and get them to understand their humanity in relationship to it. I remember I took a road trip across America, and I stopped in Austin, Texas to visit some friends, and we got to visit what was it, San Antonio? Wherever the University of Texas is. I think it's Austin.
Austin, yep.
And we got to go to there. They have an observatory there with an old antique telescope from like the turn of the century. This would have been 1900. And it has big gears, and the guys have to spin the wheels to get it to move around. And I remember we were there one night for an outreach, and my friend goes, "Hey, let's look at a star cluster." And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, there's one right here." And he moves the telescope around, and you look at it, and you're like, it's a fuzzy patch, all these little dots. And he's like, "Yeah, each of those dots is a sun with its own solar system." And my mind just went gone. I was like blown away. And through the, was it a 12 or 14 inch, a giant telescope. And when you look at it, it's like you could stick your hand in there and just grab them. They look that close.
And how far away were those?
Oh, I have no idea. I don't even remember which Messier object it was.
It's amazing that we can see it, though, with telescopes. Like, it can bring in the image that clear.
Well, that's an interesting point. So up until the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and light bulbs, lots of people could see stuff in the sky that we can't see now. So you think of the guy Messier in the 1700s, the Frenchman who discovered a whole batch of objects in the sky that he said were not stars, or they didn't look like a regular star. And so what they ended up being were galaxies, star clusters, nebula, and they're called the Messier Objects. And it's one of the things that up-and-coming astronomers try to do, is to be able to go out in the night sky and find all of them without needing a star chart. That's sort of one of the challenges. But if you go out, like nowhere here in town, you have to go to a true dark site. And the closest one is in the southern Adirondacks. And you have to be outside, complete darkness, with no moon for about an hour. and then you can start to, with the naked eye, see fuzzy patches.
Because your eyes are
and stuff.
adjusting?
Your eyes adjust. Any light pollution at all, and it goes away because the moisture in the atmosphere and other factors.
We was the comet last year?
Mm-hmm.
When we went out and tried to find the comet, the problem was like we went on every night. My wife was like, she really started to get into the planets and stuff, and I've always liked it as a kid. I mean, I think every kid grows up like liking planets and space, and I like remember looking up and we were trying to find it, and it's kind of one where I cheated. I took this there's an app that you can take and kind of like move it around and it'll tell you everything you're looking at. But I did it because I want to know like where am I looking. So we kind of had, and it was just above the horizon. The problem was it was just above a few trees, and naked eye was like the same thing. You can't be looking at anything. So if I pull my phone out, it's kind of disrupting the view. So you're sitting there, and we waited. I think it was about 15 minutes to try it, and we couldn't find it. It was kind of hazy and stuff. And then I was like, well, I'll just look at like Scott's Instagram tomorrow, or Scott's Facebook, and I'll just see what he saw, because I know he's gonna find it. But we tried so hard to like look at it. It was tough, and a lot of it you play tricks with your eyes. Like, I think that's it, and it's like, nah, not really. And
well, it took Ed and I several days to find it, and we would go out. We would meet at out by the bike path, and we would look and look. He'd have his binoculars, and I'd have my camera.
Was this at night or in the morning?
At first, it was in the morning, and then as the comet moved around the sun, then we went out at night and saw it. And inevitably, for both of us, it took technology for us to find it the first time, and then after that, it was a piece of cake, because then you know what to look for. It's like, oh, it's that fuzzy patch. Now, I have bad eyes. I have glasses and stuff, so I leverage the technology to its best side so that I can see stuff.
But you've got pictures with the tail and everything.
Oh, yeah. And that's I'm leveraging technology. There's no way the human eye could perceive that in our light conditions here in town.
The one comet that I have very vivid memories of was Hale Bopp in 97.
97, yeah.
And the only reason I know and this was, I mean, I was 7 years old at the time, so to me, this was one of those, I just remember walking out of where I went to school, and they had like an open swim type thing, and you went out at night. I don't know if I told you this story or told this to Ed. They were walking through the parking lot, and it was probably May, June. It was late it was kind of around this time. And I remember walking out in the long days, and it was probably about 7:30 at night. I remember looking up, no more than probably 30, 40 degrees up, and you could see it clear as day going across the sky. And it wasn't like, you didn't even have to look at it. It was like, I looked up, it was like seeing the moon. It was like right there. And it was the trippy, I've never seen, I think Halley's Comet came through a few years later, but it didn't have the...
I think it was a little earlier.
Was it earlier?
Yeah.
It didn't have like the punch that Hale Bopp didn't. We'll never see Hale Bopp again. That's, I mean...
Hale Bopp was very crystal clear. I remember seeing, because I was in graduate school, and I have a couple pictures of it floating around. It was super bright, super contrasty in the sky, super easy to see.
And fairly big too, and like close to us.
Yeah, large. Hallies Comet was very large. I went out. I had a friend in high school named John Underwood, and he had a really nice telescope. And so I would go out and try and learn astrophotography with him, and we would look at stuff. All over South Alabama, we'd drive around, and it's like, oh, this is a dark spot. We'd jump out in some farmer's field and look at stuff and take pictures. And we went out looking for Halley's Comet, and I remember when I finally saw it, it was like, oh my God, it's giant. It's massive, but you couldn't see it in town. It was dim. I can only imagine what it had to have been like, 150 years or longer.
When there's no pollution.
With no pollution, no light.
Because that's what, every 70 years?
75, yeah.
So we should, in theory, see it again, depending on how old you were when it came through. Yeah. Because I do remember that one, but again, if it was before Hale Bopp, I was younger. Yeah. Hale Bopp, I know for a fact, was 97. I don't know why the context of 97 hit, but it's one of my very vivid memories of that. Was not, it wasn't a picture I saw. It was just clear as day. I remember seeing it as a kid. Now how big do you know how big comets can range from? The actual ball or whatever? It's ice, right?
It's ice, dirty ice and rocks and dirt and dust and stuff. I don't know how big they can be for its visibility. How big does one have to be before you see it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's distance too.
Distance and also angle to the sun. If the tail is directly away from us as it's coming in towards the sun, it'll just be a fuzzy patch. If it's to the side and the sun is illuminating the tail, and the tail's very long, then it'd be very obvious, very easy to see. So, but
yeah, because Hale Bopp might have just been so close that it looked big, or it might have been so big that it was far away and it just looked close.
It also could be the reflectivity of the material that's coming off of it. Water and ice and cyanogens.
I just remember you could see it going across the sky, but it wasn't shooting star. It was like this slow, but you could see it like slowly moving. And it was only a couple days I think you could see it.
Yeah.
Or maybe 1 or 2, I don't know. But this one day it was just like crystal clear. You could just see you could see the tail and everything. I'm like, God, this is just trippy.
Yeah,
just
it's
see that
amazing.
in the sky.
Amazing.
Now, you've been going through. It seems like memory lane, but I've been following a lot of your photos that you've been posting. So all these photos that you're posting, are these just random, just going through like albums and finding these?
So the way to think about it is, I started taking pictures when I was 16, and then and I learned on film. And so I shot a lot of film. Then went to undergrad and graduate school, and I shot film, had a photo studio, shot film. And then I started shooting with digital cameras in the early 2000s. But I still had a lot of film and film equipment that I continued to use. And so I have amassed this huge archive of negatives. And about maybe 8 years ago or so, I started as a project to scan all of them so that I could present them in some way and make prints. I don't have a darkroom anymore, but I want to be able to print them out. And so I've scanned maybe, I don't know, 100,000 negatives, something like that. It's a lot. And
to digital.
To digital.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you could get rid of the negatives, keep it. Now you have it all digitized online.
Exactly. And so, but to scan a negative, is only a small portion. You have to spend some time cleaning it up, logging it. There's a lot more involved. And so maybe a couple weeks ago, I got this idea. It's like, my wife's like, why don't you start showing some of these images?
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right. So I was maybe not randomly going through, but I was going through and saying, all right, I want to show a black and white image today. So I would go through and find an interesting one. And my images are organized in a couple of ways. There's artistic projects like this. I have a project where I went to India for a month and did nothing but photograph the stuff of my travels. And that's sort of one project. Another one is I photographed fish, live fish, dead fish in a museum.
What area?
And this was in Florence.
Okay.
And but also I shot fish projects in, when I was 16, I shot fish. I had an aquarium. So fish has always been a sort of an interesting theme in my image making. But then there's a lot of travels. I went to South Africa a couple times, and then all over Europe. There are these pictures. But a couple weeks ago, so I started going through, and I'm like, well, I need a color image. What interesting color images do I have? I need something more abstract, and I'm trying to make the feed interesting, but at the same time, it's giving me the chance to sort of explore all my images and pick out ones. It's like, this would make a nice series. This might make a nice batch, and so I'm using it as a creative outlet.
It's like a photo of the day kind of thing.
Sort of.
And I love when you, like, there's a lot of sometimes just random people that you've taken photos of, or random structures, and then it's always like you kind of just give a rough sketch of where you were in time, and a lot, like you said, a lot of these were 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, at least, and some of them are even are probably some of. I haven't shown really any of the super old ones yet, but most of them are from 1987 to now. And the majority of them are the film years. There's a few digital images, like the one I published today was from a hike in the Adirondacks a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago.
How long does it take you to come up with these photos? Like so you're going through these photos roughly daily?
Yeah, like there's great apps out there. I might take a couple hours on a Sunday and plan out 4 days worth, so I don't have to worry about it. But I actually enjoy getting up early in the morning, get a cup of coffee and just look through the images. Oh, I like that one. Let me pull the dust spots off of it. Don't forget, these are negatives that were scanned, so they have flaws that digital images just don't have. They got dust and scratches. In some cases, the negative was like overdeveloped or underdeveloped, so I have to cook it in Photoshop to get it to look the way I want it to look.
So what's a negative? I mean, I know what they are, but like I guess in technical terms, what are they?
So from the dawn of photography, really was you take light sensitive emulsion and you dry it onto an object. The object can be opaque like paper, or it can be clear like a piece of glass or film. A negative that we refer to in common nomenclature is a thin ribbon of plastic that had a light sensitive emulsion on it, exposed it to light, and then developed it. And so what you have left is a piece of plastic with an image that has silver on it, silver halide. And that image then you can scan by shining light through it onto a digital sensor, and then you have an image in the computer. But the negative, because of the process of shining light on it and then washing away everything that did not get light to it, it's an inverse image of reality. So it's an inverse image of what the print is. That's why it's called a negative and not a positive.
So when you do, then it is a negative, like you said, inverse. When you look at it, you can still create the actual image through the negative.
Yes, yeah. You just take the negative, you shine light through it, and then in the computer you invert that so that the areas in the negative that were clear become the dark areas in the image. The areas that is opaque in the negative then becomes the light areas of the image.
So as long as you have the negative, you can create the photo.
Oh yeah.
Or recreate it.
I can.
Now, so anytime you take a photo back then, you always had a negative.
Yeah.
There's always...
Well, if you're shooting film, yeah, that's the whole point. There are other kinds of film. There's positive film, like slides, the transparencies. Now, those you shoot it and process it, and there's no negative. It goes straight to a positive. And then that's the actual film itself that you have left after it's gone through the chemical baths.
So when I was doing... Actually, a question for you. Light.
Mm-hmm.
How does light work in photography? And I know this is a loaded question. You can go a lot of different ways. But just the idea of like... how. So the reason I say it is like I get an external flash from my camera.
Yep.
And it makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm. I always wonder, am I using it correctly? And I've tried to like YouTube it and stuff. But, it's just kind of a simple like Canon, pop it on, turn it around. And my thought, from what I've gathered, is that you're supposed to bounce it off. If I'm taking a photo this way, typically you'd like bounce it off the wall to reflect and then add more light to the subject.
So you got to take a step back and say, there's nothing you're supposed to do.
Okay.
Everything is about what are you trying to solve? What is the problem? So you have a dark room and you want to take a picture. You don't have to use a flash, but you want to use a flash. Well, for what purpose? And that's really, I spent years trying to figure out. I have an idea in my head. I want to get it on and I want to make a print. How do I get from the idea in my head to the print? Well, in some cases, it takes a special camera or special film or a flash unit to get what I want. So to give you an idea, a flash unit produces a whole lot of light very, very, very quickly in a tiny little fragment of time. So what that will allow you to do is to freeze motion. And also, it doesn't get hot because it's not always on. So there's benefits to that kind of a light source. But there's lots of different light sources. You can have an incandescent bulb can be a light source, but it gets hot, will burn you. You need to plug it in the wall. There's lots of other components to it. So light in photography is like part of the tool set. It's like, how do you use them? It's the medium, to be honest. Light and film together is the medium that you're working in. And you manipulate light to say things in the image for you. Soft light is very flattering to people. It makes them look better. You don't get dark shadows under the eyes. It diffuses, it de-emphasizes wrinkles on faces. So soft light tends to be the go-to light source for portraits. You see it in the painting world as well. A lot of the traditional, like Renaissance painters, will have used light sources like these windows, soft north-facing light coming in because it de-emphasizes wrinkles and makes people look better. Sharp light lets you see texture more easily because the shadows that are cast with sharp light are darker. And so the light area and the dark area having a larger differential then will show off that texture in a more dramatic way. So like late in the evening, you'll see light will go across the beach and all the little footprints in the sand become a lot more obvious than they do at noon because the light is coming to the side and each one of the little footprints is casting a shadow.
So, cause I got a couple light set up. So a lot of times when I do like video or stuff, I have this light coming in.
Yep.
And then I forgot the names of them. Bad. I have a light with like a diffuser, it has a cloth on. I mean, you actually see it right behind you, and that one I usually put about, and this might like, again, layman's research here, but about 30 degrees off center. Like the camera's here, about 30 degrees roughly. So that hits the face, a little softer light, and I played with like the whatever the lights are, kelvins or whatever kelvins. What's the IPUs? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So kelvins are the reference to color balance.
Yep.
So the higher the number, the lower the number references whether it's warmer, more yellow and red, or more cooler, sort of more bluish color. And that way you can adjust those to match the ambient light that you're in. Light in the shade outside is more blue than the light coming directly from the sun, which is more yellow. Because the shadow areas of like underneath those trees is actually the light reflected off the blue sky. So it's going to be cooler because it's blue.
Oh.
So what you're referring to is like using lights and changing them in reference to someone's face. You could spend a lifetime studying how to move lights and manipulate lights to just shoot portraits, just to make people look better or look worse, depending on what your needs are. What are you trying to achieve?
What's the backlight or hair light?
Hair light,
and that one
backlight.
Too, because it makes the depth, adds depth to the
Yep.
photo. And it's like
God light. There's lots of ways. Another way to think of it is, and this is how I would teach it when I was teaching photography. Is like, imagine you have an object like a melon or a ball of some sort. A ball, if it's flat, looks like just a circle. You have to give it shadow to be able to show three-dimensional depth. And use of like a hair light and a side light and a fill light allows you to fill out that object in three-dimensional space. And so it can be represented in the camera, in a video or in a still photo. So when you look at a three-dimensional object, you have to think in terms of, how do I get light to reference this as a three-dimensional object?
So if you're taking a photo of, say, the chair.
Yeah.
You have to obviously, because it's an object, add the
Yep.
three-dimensional layers to it.
Yep.
So you have backlight, you have the light in the front, you work with what, like a 3-light system?
It depends. So every object is different. So the chair that you're sitting on is very special because it has a rocker mechanism. So as one of the ideas was, I would sit down with the art director and say, what are you trying to sell with this chair? Well, we need to show the rocker. That's the technology. We need to show it comes in different sizes. So you got multiple chairs have to be photographed together. And then, what kind of legs? Well, there's 3 kinds of legs. Well, let's add another chair. Some of the legs might be chrome, which is a unique problem in photography because then it reflects everything in your studio. So for the chairs, I might have a soft light on top of the chairs, and then I might have cards reflecting light from underneath, have a spotlight on the rocker. I might have 2 fill lights in the back so that the background has no shadows, so you only see the chair floating in space. And the way I work is that I build an image one piece at a time. Just like when I photograph a person, when I do a portrait. You remember the videos I shot at CrossFit?
Which was incredible.
Same way. So you take a person, you sit them down, and you say, okay, what am I doing here? I have to show this person. So they're a person, not a drawing. So I need to show them three-dimensionally. So I have one light on the side. That's my quote-unquote main light. Then I have to look at the face and say, are the shadows too dark? Does it make them look mean or evil? It's like, oh yeah, so let's add some light. So we do a fill light. And it's like, okay, so the background is very dark. And then you have this person floating in space. Well, I need to separate them more from the background. So I put a hair light. So that way you've got texture of the hair, main light, fill light. And then it's like, oh, the background's still too dark. So I got to put a light in the background to light the space so that it looks natural.
Yeah, because the way you did it, like you brought it out, like in that situation, the person was very illuminated.
Yeah.
And the same thing is like it was very, like everything just looked very, like I say high structure. I'm going by like Instagram filters, but there was a lot of, you could pick everything out, pick the person. It was a lot of detail, a lot of contrast. You could easily, and even the background, you could still make out the stuff in the background, but it was crazy because you're in almost like a I think we were almost like in a lighted space, and it looked dark. It looked like you were like in a studio, and you really weren't. Now, hair light, is that? I've always been through my research. That's always up, or no?
Well, it depends. It depends on what you're trying to get across.
Okay.
So
you can kind of see where mine is, and if I use that if I'm sitting on the chair. I don't know if that's correct, but I kind of just played around with it.
Well, a lot of it is experimentation. Every person is different. I never light this different people with the same exact lighting. I always manipulate it so that it makes whatever I'm trying to get across to their personality through the image. A hair light for some people who have a lot of hair, it might be up high and off to the side. For someone who's bald, absolutely not, because then you would get shiny reflections, which are not flattering at all. Speaking from experience as a bald man, but it really depends. There's lots of it depends, and the images that we shot, like in at CFP. The object was to show the person in the space but separate them from it so that you knew it was a workout space. You could recognize it, but you don't want that to be the point. The point is them getting across that what they get out of the relationship with CFP. And I did it in multiple ways. So I did it not only with light, but also I threw the background out of focus. I used other tools in the camera to separate them. I can see it's a gem, but why is it blurry? It doesn't need to be clear, because as a viewer, I can make that leap. I can make that jump.
So you're saying because it's blurry, but I can still see enough focus to know what it is, but again, it doesn't take my eyes away from what I should be concentrating on.
Yep.
It's such a cool, and everything you do is manual, right? You manual focus on everything.
Well, no, it depends. It depends. So in some cases, like if I'm shooting sports, autofocus is a godsend. Mm-hmm. If I'm shooting things like stars, you have to use manual focus. It's the only way to get it sharp and right. It really depends. And some lenses are not autofocus. You can only use them manually, like telescopes, for instance. They have focusing mechanisms, but they're very expensive. But when I'm doing commercial photo work, oftentimes I will use autofocus to get close, and then I'll fine tune it with manual focus. And there's some reasons, technical reasons for that. Like on the chair, if I'm trying to manipulate the depth of field, do I want the background blurry or not? Autofocus grabs a contrasty piece of the object and says that's in focus. And it is. But it might not be everything I need in focus. I might need to manipulate it a little bit. So there's a good and bad to it.
Now, sports photography. Mm-hmm. Do you do that often? Probably now a little bit more, like if Eli's playing baseball or something?
A little bit.
Or like movement, I guess?
Yeah, I enjoy sports photography when it's non-traditional sports. Baseball is okay. It's fun. I love shooting my son, Eli, and shooting his team. Like Aikido and martial arts is a lot of fun. It's really hard. That's what I like, is the challenge, because it's very dark. It's indoors. I can't bring in lights.
Well, you also have to understand the movement patterns, because then it's like I can get the angle because I know this move or this grapple that this guy's going to do.
You saw that in the images that I shot of you guys in CFP.
Yeah.
The sports images. Having done the movements, I know where I need to shoot to get the right framing and the moment of execution, and it takes experience. That's why professional sports photographers tend to be a very specialized lot.
Like a niche?
Yeah. It's totally
special cameras too, or is it more like a lot of it has to do with the flash, or not flash, shutter speed?
Yeah, shutter speed, also manipulation. A lot of times some of the cameras have what's called trap focus. You set the camera to only fire a frame when an object enters it and actually enters the frame, the plane of focus, so that you don't have to catch it. It catches itself for you. In other cases, it's access. In my mind, most of the great sports photos are about being at the right position to the players at the right time with good light. I've worked with some sports photographers in Florida, and they would go into a basketball game, and this was in the days of film, and they would hang up in the rafters giant strobe lights so that they could illuminate the entire basketball court or the entire hockey arena at once. So one guy on the ground is shooting, and he has dozens of these giant strobe units are in the ceiling to illuminate and provide enough light for the whole arena so that they could freeze motion. Otherwise, the film was not sensitive enough to light to give you a shutter speed to freeze motion.
In your opinion, I have, and I'm putting you on the spot here, what is the most iconic sports photo of all time that you can think of?
Oh God, there's tons. Off the top of my head, there's the one of.
You're going to get the one I'm thinking of, I think.
The one of what's his name? The basketball player.
Michael Jordan?
Yeah.
When he's dunking?
Yeah.
When he's up in the air? Yeah. From the foul line?
Yep. That's it.
The one I was actually thinking of, and the reason I say this is it was sports, but it was kind of like, I don't think, and I want to ask your opinion on this, because I think this was a photo that was probably done with not a lot of technicality, more just in the moment, but just iconic, right place, right time. Because that one, there was obviously some, work being done because he was going through the air and kind of, tongue out and like going to dunk it. I'm thinking of 1980, Miracle on Ice.
Oh, yeah.
And the guy's arms in the air and they're all like celebrating.
Yep.
If you really look at that photo, I could have took that photo on the sideline.
Yep.
I mean, there really wasn't a lot of, I think, technicality to it. It was just more of like photo, and it was like, wow, that's actually a really cool.
But I will agree with you and disagree.
Okay.
So it's the classic thing of, a guy walks into an art gallery and sees a scribble on the wall and says, my 5-year-old can do that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, your 5-year-old can scribble, but can he put it in the context of 5,000 years of culture and art? And did he do it with a color palette that matched a particular concept? So when you have something like a bunch of guys on ice throwing their arms up, celebrating, okay? The guy that's on the ice with the camera and the wide-angle lens made the decision to get close to them, to get the space around them so that you could see what was going on. Every one of those is a decision he made, an artistic decision. It is not happenstance. Do happy accidents happen? Absolutely. Professionals don't work with happy accidents. You have to plan that out. So like the shot of Michael Jordan, strobe units in the rafters.
Everything was black around.
And that way he could separate the player from the space around it. He wanted it to be about him and his prowess on the court. And that's what separates professionals from everyone else, is they're able to build that image. They don't get into the right place at the right time by accident. They choose where to shoot from. They choose what camera, what lens, what light, what time of day. All of this comes together. I knew you were going to
say this, because as soon as I said it, I'm like, there's got to be more to it than it looks like. Because again, like that's one of the most. I mean, there's a lot, but that like just always sticks out to me as one of the greatest sports moments of all time. And then here you got this iconic photo that if somebody sees it, they know exactly what game, they know the score, they know everything about it.
Yep.
Because the Michael Jordan dunk, I remember the photo, but if you were to ask me, I'm like, it was obviously the dunk. I'm assuming the dunk competition at some point in time. I don't know what year, I don't know anything about it, but like 1980 Olympics, like everybody knows to the day when that happened. That was the only reason why it stuck out. I mean, there's plenty of other ones. If you really, the Muhammad Ali when he's got his arm hooked like that. That's such an iconic photo, and you kind of think of a lot of like Sports Illustrated photos. Or was it? I think it was Roger Maris. Maybe it was Hank Aaron. It was a home run, and they had the picture of the guy hitting the home run. The bat was dropped, but they saw the whole stadium.
Yep.
And I can't remember which one it was, but I want to say it was Roger Maris breaking 60.
It may have been.
And it was just kind of like this swing, and then it was just like you saw him like kind of like with the follow through, and the ball was going. It was kind of, you just saw the stadium, so it wasn't just him, but like you said, it was the wide angle to show the space, show where you are, and
exactly. Well, and there's lots of examples of that, like even in sports car racing, Formula One. Okay, cars are moving very rapidly, and you can only be in certain places in certain positions as a photographer or as a fan without being in danger. So you have to pick and choose those very carefully. Then you have to choose the right equipment to shoot there, and you have to be, you have to make a lot of decisions, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes before you start making really good decisions to make really amazing and excellent photos.
So if I was to go out and take a camera, ideally someone takes their phone out and takes a picture of a NASCAR race and the cars are going around, are we typically going to see like the blur of the car on a normal camera?
It really depends, because you don't have how bright is it? Is it night, daytime? Are you 100 feet from the car or 1 foot from the car? All of those will have a dramatic impact on blurriness or clarity of the image. Does your camera have a very high sensitivity to light or very low? That the shutter speed, or the electronic snap of the image, that sort of freezing of time, will impact whether it's blurry or not. Because how fast is the car moving in a relationship? A car moving at 100 miles an hour, 100 feet away is very different than 1 foot away. And camera
you're more blurry 1 foot away.
Yes,
gotcha.
Because of your relationship to it. So, it's perspective then really does count. So, but if the difference between like an iPhone camera is dramatic. Not in that it doesn't have the resolution. It's just that it doesn't have the pull of a telephoto lens, for instance, a glass telephoto lens, not an artificial one built into the software. That'll make a difference as well. There's lots of things that impact it.
Do you take a lot of photos on your camera? Or on your phone? On your camera?
Some. I like it and I don't like it. I love it and hate it at the same time.
I think it makes the everyman be able to take a photo and be like, because the one I have is like 3 lenses and it has a pretty good wide lens and good aperture. Like lets a lot of light in. And then I was fascinated by it. I didn't really understand this, and I talked to a couple people. Like when you go into the film, filming in 4K, like some of these cameras are incredible, but if you go 4K at like 60 frames per second, it almost looks too unrealistic because it's so sharp.
Yep.
And I didn't realize that a lot of films are shot in like 24 frames per second because they're a little more cinematic.
Yep.
Where if you go too many frames per second, it looks almost too real.
Yep.
Where it takes away kind of like that like creative edginess.
Absolutely.
And I always thought it would be the opposite. I thought like, oh, these guys are going like, 60 frames per second all day long, and then you get to the point where you see those like that's almost too freaky clear. Yeah. Like it's
absolutely. Well, that's one of the problems TV is having now is that I can see you're getting nervous on the chair.
You know what's actually happening? It's not that I'm falling. I'm like it's almost like the angle that I'm at.
Yeah.
It's going because the thing is this. Okay, so back to this chair. We're at an hour and 15. It was funny. It was just under an hour when I started to feel it. It's a smaller seat.
Yeah.
And typically when you're sitting on a chair, you have a lot of surface area where like your legs are on a lot.
Yeah.
And this doesn't. I mean, it's like basically your backside and that's it. And the problem is it keeps jamming under like the upper part of my thighs because it's like jamming in. That's almost giving them like putting them to sleep, like a dead leg. So I keep shifting because like my leg feels like it's falling asleep. I feel great. My core is like working, but it's not one where you can just kind of like shift. You can't really shift in this chair. It moves, but you gotta, so it was about an hour.
About an hour. That's good.
Which is
That's
good.
a good start.
But it feels great. I don't want to get off the chair. Just like my legs are going to sleep a little bit. So where were we before the chair?
Oh, jeez. I don't know.
Well, the frames per second.
Yeah.
So one of the on my phone I have. Well, this was a few years ago. We went to when we were doing the CrossFit games. We went there, and I remember getting a photo, and it was one of the events, and it was a running event, and the girls were doing it, and they were running by, and this is right after I knew my camera could do all these funky things. I'm like, I'm getting 4K, 60 frames per second, and here you go, and you get like the top woman in the world, and they're like running by, and I remember taking it, and I ended up rewatching. I'm like, it's almost too freaky how like it's almost like they're gonna like run through the camera at you. I'm like, it was almost uncomfortably clear. Yeah. That I was like, I really should have taken this down to like a 30 frames per second, and then maybe 4K at 30 frames per second probably would have been fine, but it just would have made it a little smoother, which you'd probably see on the.
What you're responding to is a personal preference on your part. Mm-hmm. So the world doesn't care what it's shot in. What you care about is how it's your perception of it afterwards. You're like the way you describe it. You're like, I want to see it more cinematically. I want to see it like. Chariots of Fire, slow-mo at the finish line.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why? Why do you want to see it that way?
Wait, the 60 frames per second should have been slower. I could have slowed that down.
You could have. Yeah. You could have. But you didn't. But you realized that afterwards.
It was to the point where I looked at it, I'm like, something's not right. Like, it almost looks too clear. And I've done that before with like my kids. I'm like, nah, it just looks weird. It almost it's a little too real.
So one of the things that filmmakers will do, and it's sort of one of the tricks, is to downsample. You shoot something at a higher rate, and then downsample it in software like Premiere or Final Cut, and then that way you get more of a cinematic feel to it. And I do that a lot. Like I shoot videos for like the Chair Company and other people, and I'll shoot at a frame rate and at a resolution that gives me a lot of flexibility. So maybe shoot at 29.9 frames per second instead of something higher. If the point is not to freeze motion, if the point is to sell something, I might slow it down, make it a little bit blurrier. And what that does is that triggers stuff inside of our heads about nostalgia and things like when we were kids. Now, I reference cultural constructs from the 70s and 80s. Young people today are referencing cultural constructs of what nostalgia is from the 80s and 90s or 90s and 2000s. And that is very different. So they see the world and reference the cues differently than I do, differently than you do.
Well, we take like referencing. So I grew up pretty much the 90s was my childhood. I was born in 89, so that was the 90s, early 2000s. And you're starting to see when they talk about like fashion and trends coming back, you're seeing a lot of like 90s stuff come back, like a lot of like the like vintage clothes, which for you, you're like that was college or whatever. But when you actually you look at it, like these old, there's actually Plattsburgh Vintage. I don't know if you've heard of.
I heard it.
Okay, so he, as a kid I know, and I didn't know he was into like clothes and fashion, but you start looking at all this stuff, and it's like stuff you get from the 90s. And it was so funny because you get these like WWF, like before WWE, WWF shirts. You have like the Rock on them, or you'd have these, it could even be like Guess jeans, like all these old brands you never see anymore, like Steve Madden, and you start looking at these things that I remember as a kid, like, oh my god, I remember that as a young child. And then now people are wearing them, or the almost like the, I don't call them tearaway basketball pants, but like the jackets, like the windbreaker. You know the ones I'm talking about. They kind of have like the sleeves that go up, almost like you're wearing like a shoulder pads on these things. Like like you'd see like the Bulls wear. You see like a team come running out, and basketball, and you're seeing all these windbreakers, and it's funny how fashion does start to come back around because again, I think a lot of it's nostalgic because you're seeing a lot of lately like playing cards are becoming popular. Like I know, like Pokemon has become very, very popular again. Like I remember the original Pokemon coming out. We trade those on the playground. They got them banned from school because kids were and that was back 97, 98, 99 when it really took off in the States. And now you're starting to see it come full circle where people are like collecting them. I know for a fact I have cards still. I have to look for them, but I kind of want to be like, how much are these worth? Because I had a lot of them I haven't touched in 20 something years, but. And I kept good care of them. They weren't like, so part of me is like, I got a gold mine sitting like somewhere in my,
Seeing that stuff come back that from your own childhood and your teenage years, does it make you feel older?
Older, like, do I feel like, makes me feel just like, I'm like, my God, I can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah, but.
You know what? Actually, oddly enough, it almost makes me feel like younger, like I'm going back in time. So my mom, it's kind of weird. I was thinking about this the other day. So my mom like doesn't throw away anything. So the amount of stuff that has come back into my life over the last 3 years because she's kept it from my childhood, and now my sons play with it, or my daughter. And there's stuff. I had a friend that came over about a month. He goes, I remember. I goes, well, I had a castle just like that. I'm like, well, no, that actually was my castle. That is my castle from 25 years ago. But when you start looking at this stuff, it's like my son likes Spider-Man. I was a huge Spider-Man guy. My son likes not as much Ninja. We got some Ninja Turtles. He's got Ninja Turtle socks, but he's not as big in the Ninja Turtles. But we start looking at, I would say, like I was Ninja Turtles, I was G.I. Joe, Power Ranger, Spider-Man. I mean, that was kind of my childhood when it came to like superhero guys. I was never Batman. I was never into Superman. I was like loved Spider-Man, but G.I. Joe's had all the little figurines, and I'm slowly coming full circle where I feel that it's making a comeback slightly, which is weird. Like when I give him a shirt and he's got Spider-Man, they're still making Spider-Man. They're still making Ninja Turtles. And a lot of it is I think I'm like, well, you know what? The people making these are in their 20s and 30s now. And that's their childhood. The guys making the, if they come back and they make the Ninja Turtle movies that they came out with 5-6 years ago. I mean, those came out probably guys around 30, 35 that were making it, that were, that grew up with that in the 90s, that grew up with the original early 90s, the Ooze and all the, the Splinter and all these things. And like I have action figures from when they made the Samurai Ninja Turtle ones, and I had all the figurines. And again, they're slowly creeping their way in. I'm like, God, I remember, like, why did she save these? But then I'm in my head, I'm like, well, I mean, there's some stuff in my kids that I'm like, God, I would hate to, like, I'm more attached to these than my kids are. And I kind of think about that stuff. I'm like, I'm not as attached to that stuff as probably my parents are, because they still remember me as a kid. And I'm like looking at some of my stuff my son has. I'm like, man, like, I don't want him to give away this, because like that just reminds me of my like little boy who's not, he's turning into a little kid now. And it's, I don't know if it makes me feel older. I almost feel like I get more attached. Like it kind of brings it full circle. And it's like, because you can, it's not like you just see it in like a or it's almost like when you see something in a picture,
Yeah.
and then it comes back into your life years later, but you almost can't believe like it's this pen, but I remember seeing this pen in a picture 30 years ago,
Yeah.
or when you go into a house that's black and white. And then they're like, "Oh, this is actually that from that," and you're like, "No, but it's got color." Like it's trippy.
Well, it's context. It's putting something in context for you that you normally can't. You're sharing, toys with your kids. Like my mom gave me the original, or my brother gave me the original Legos that I grew up with in the 70s. And then I gave them to Eli, and he and I sat there and played with them. A space shuttle set of
And those
Legos.
are the same exact blocks you played with years
Same
before.
exact blocks. Now, since then, he's gotten a lot more and new ones, and he loves Legos, and we still play Legos occasionally. And but I sit there and I'm sharing an object and a space and time with him of something I did.
Yeah.
So it's like there's this wonderful nostalgic reference to it. And
I had that the other day with a puzzle. Now, the puzzle was a puzzle I had as a child.
Yeah.
And I remember putting it together as a child. But my son, same thing. He's like getting into it, and I just found myself sitting there like, we're finishing this puzzle, and it was weird. Like I haven't done a puzzle in I don't know how long.
Yeah.
But to sit there and like move these around, and actually I'm like, this is kind of fun. Like it's fun to just put the pieces together, and it's a simple concept. And I think now with technology and adulthood, where it just seems like you don't get to play as much. You mean, you get to play. It's a different kind of playing, but it's like to go back and simplify down to a board game or a puzzle or cards or something where it's like I would love to play a board game. I'd love to sit down. I got a Monopoly game if there's never been open. It's just sitting there, and it's like I'd love to just sit down with a bunch of people, get some drinks, maybe you don't even need music. Just like sit there and just play and talk, and just like what you used to do as a kid.
Well, it's funny. A lot of times artists think that, the playing is what a lot of artists do, because that lets you enter that flow state where you're not worried about dinner. You're not worried about paying the bills. You're worried about what's going on around you right at that moment. And games are absolutely a part of that. And for kids, I think their development, it's critical for them to learn things, what is right and wrong, what are rules. Maybe sometimes you don't have rules on purpose so that you can sort of think outside the box. If you don't give kids and adults that play time, that really concentrated time to not concentrate, then they lose out on a lot of creativity.
Well, that's what I was talking about. We were talking about before. Is like just trying to find time to create and think. It's like I've spent so much time just one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. I mean, that's one of the beauties of the podcast. Like I don't look at my phone for 2 hours, whatever, hour, 2, 3 hours, whatever it might be, and you just sit there and you focus on conversation, you focus on people, you focus on words, you focus on thoughts. And for me, it's like a nice escape during the day. And then, especially, and there's different times during the day. I've done them in the morning. I've done them late at night. You weren't a part of, I don't think you were a part. No, you were. We did one really early in the morning. Was that with you? You and Paul?
Paul,
Because I did one with Paul, and I did one with Craig and Paul, and both of them were super early. We're like dad life. Like, we're in at like 6 or 7 in the morning. And I remember we all rolled in with coffee early. Yeah. That's a different concept than if I deal with someone that I've started podcasts as late as 8 o'clock at night before. And it's different parts of the day. And like, to me, I like this like winding down the day, going into the evening, because it's almost like a happy hour time. We're just like, versus 9 o'clock in the morning to like 11 is a different mindset. My energy's different. Kind of like coffee or booze. Like there's a different different conversation.
Well, biologically, you're different at different times of day. Your endocrine system is dumping testosterone and stuff in different amounts at different times of day, whether you're waking up or sort of winding down from a day of effort. And I'm sure that impacts your conversation skills.
And I find there's certain times I'm sharper, and there's certain times I drag, and I find that sometimes my conversations, typically earlier in the afternoon, I don't even know. It's weird. I have like bursts that are really good. It's nice late at night. I feel like I'm just like clearer headed, which seems strange. That I don't know. I should probably think about it more as like where's my opportune time for podcasts, but I never have because scheduling's different with people. And like I kind of, we have different times. It could be typically 9 to 11 or 10 to 12 is a time. I have like usually 1 to 3, 2 to 4, 4 to 6. I've never really seen how it affect, or really looked into how it affected myself on the podcast. A lot of it's guest dependent too. There's some guests that I can just hit. There's a few guests, like literally I hit record and I just let them talk because they go forever.
Yep.
I would deem are probably one of the best conversationalists I've had, because the other thing is when you get on podcasts, if I'm sitting there asking you questions and asking you questions and asking you questions, then it's like you get away from the podcast. It's more of like an interview.
Yeah.
It's like usually if the guest can just take control of the conversation and just lead it, that's even better.
Yeah. Well, it takes all the pressure off you to have to define a road path for them to take the what they're talking about.
Yeah, and I don't like having this be an interview because especially when I know people, if I don't know them well, it kind of becomes an interview because it's almost more like I want to learn more about you.
Yeah.
But if you know somebody, then it's more of like I just want to like discuss stuff with you. And to me, it like opens your mind. And we talk about like the flow state. Like to me, it's like driving. And there's a reason it's not a half-hour podcast. Yeah. You don't get into the flow state for. I mean, I think our first one that we did solo, to this day, is still the longest one we did. And
yeah, it was like almost 3 hours. It was a long one.
Oh, it was 3:40.
Was it really? Wow.
Because I remember we kept because the problem was I'm terrible because that clock is the same clock. It was not working. Because I never updated it, and I remember the time it was daylight savings or whatever, and we had moved the clock back.
Yeah.
And I just remember looking at him like, oh, we're fine. And it wasn't the right time. It was an hour back of where I was supposed to move it forward. I never did. And so I kept looking up and I'm like, we just hit 2 hours. We'll go another half hour. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, crap, it's 3:40. Because both our wives were texting. Like,
exactly.
It was like 10 o'clock at night. I was like, oh, no, it's supposed to end at like 8.
So I have a question for you. Do you take your conversational skills from a particular parent or from something else in your life and your upbringing?
Again, I've never thought about this. My dad is more conversational than my mom. My mom is more introverted than my dad. My dad's definitely the gab of the family. I don't remember growing up. Either side of my family was not that I remember big storytellers. Yeah. We have a weird family. It's kind of like I'm like the classic Irish goodbye guy. Like I'm just like, all right, see you guys, and I'll walk out the door. Like I don't like saying goodbye to everybody. I'm like, if I've been here for 4 hours. We could have talked during the 4 hours. I don't want to have the long goodbye walking out to the car. I don't know. I like thinking. I like testing my mind. I grew up with puzzles. I grew up with I like dealing with like Sudokus, and I like dealing with mind puzzles, and I like doing riddles, and anything that got my mind to think, or like the word problems that were like riddles, where it's like, well, if you had, you know what I'm talking about, like it's like, you know, Sally and Johnny have this, and this person has this, and they have this many, but this person doesn't have any, and then you try to figure out who has what, and you get the spreadsheet out, and I like it because it got my mind to think. I find that conversation, bringing different people on, it allows me to pick their brains, it allows me to think, it allows me to get different perspectives, it allows me to, I probably have some bias towards guests. I mean, they're all people that I know are interested in, but at the end of the day, I try not to have an extreme bias. It's just more of who I like. So I've had different walks of life, different ages, different backgrounds, different, anything you could imagine, but picking the brains of people to me is fascinating. And we all have one thing in common. We're all, at some point in time, step foot in my office. Like, I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but you're from the North Country or visiting or whatever. And I think there's a benefit to that. The conversation piece, though, I think just comes down to, I like deep thoughts. I like talking to people. Yesterday, one of my favorite people in the world to talk to is Craig's wife, actually, Karen.
Oh, yeah.
And I hadn't talked to her in a while. We got together yesterday, and it was like just a fresh air. But we got to talk, and there's things that I like talking to her, and there's times she like brings out thoughts that I didn't know about, and then I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, well, I like that because it gets me thinking. With it, like you said, like where do you get? I don't know, 130 something of these, and I've never sat down to think like, where did I get that thought from? I think it's just me. I've always liked conversation. Like if I just had coffee and just like sat down and talked to somebody, or had a drink and just sat around the campfire and talked, I just like that.
Well, for a lot of people, my wife is not a big conversationalist, and I grew up in a family where you were a conversationalist or you were not, and introverts and extroverts. And my mother's a huge extrovert, so I grew up with I had a great role model to talk, putting people at ease. Growing up in the Deep South, having those verbal skills allowed you to get access to do things, and also very regimented. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Thank you, please. There was a real structure around that, and I sort of used that to my advantage. Whereas introverts don't don't have the same toolkit to work with. Your ability to converse with people is very disarming. It's very congenial. It makes it very easy to talk to. So that's why the podcast is the perfect format for that. You throw a question out and you say, "Oh, it takes you down a road." Well, go. You got 3 hours.
Yeah,
you can follow it all the way to the end. And I think that's what makes this so successful. And it's really lovely to talk through. To be able to say, we're going to talk about anything. It might be stars, might be photos, could be.
I mean, I had no notes under your name.
Yeah.
I don't know. We're just going to ask him. He took a cool photo today. I want to ask him about it. I know a little bit about people, but it's. I think the conversational aspect too. The podcast 100%, because I've had people come on it and I can tell. Like I might ask them to come on. Like I don't know if I want to do it. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm not going to press her anyway to do it. But then I might ask them again, or I might see him somewhere like, you want to do it? And then. There hasn't been one person, at least they've never vocally said it to me, that has left the podcast. I'm like, God, that was awful. Or that was way harder than I thought it was going to be. Everybody's like, oh my God, that was easy.
It's fun. It
I know,
should
you
be
just
fun.
have to talk. I'm like,
exactly.
Well, what do I need to prepare? I'm like, just be able to come and talk. That's it. Like, I'm not going to challenge you.
Yep. What do you feel is what do you feel your podcast is missing?
I think sometimes I guess my couple things. I've never put someone on the podcast with the idea of this is going to get likes or this is going to get shares or people listening. I don't care. My numbers, I just looked the other day, I'm approaching 10,500 downloads, which is cool. Now, the funny thing was over 1,000 of those are coming in the last 30 days. So you're starting to see like 10% of it. So we're going on a little over a year and a half or 2.5 years. 10% has been in the last month. So when you really space it out, I mean, our first podcast we did might have been listened to by like 10 people. Yeah. Which is crazy. So if I put this out, this is at least without any work being done, is probably going to be 40 to 50 people. Yeah. And I've had a few that have gone over 100 depending on how they share it and promote it. Yeah. It's what it might be missing is because I always want to do the podcast in person. I don't want to do Zoom. I don't want to. I could branch out. I could expand out and interview different people because there's a lot of people I know that don't live here that would be cool to talk to. But part of me is like, you know what? And I've done Zoom interviews and they're not. It's okay, but it's not the same. In person's the best. It's definitely the way to go. And there's nuances and cues and stuff that are important. Well, I think was it 70% of language is not nonverbal. So to me, if I go on a Zoom call and I really can't feel their presence and there's a lot to it, and I think. That might be something. I don't even want to say I'm missing it because that's something I've actively chose not to do. Because some people are like, "Oh, why don't you have this person or reach out to this person or DM this person?" I'm like, unless you're going to travel or I'm going to travel. I've only traveled technically twice out of my office, but only one trip, and that was about a month ago. And partly is because I wanted to do it in their space. Kind of what we were talking about with the core. I would like to do it in their space. And I think that's part of why I haven't been able to connect it yet. Is just figuring out a time to go over and do it there. And I think that might be what I'm missing is maybe diversifying outside a little bit because it's not geared at local people at all. It's more geared at people I just want to talk to. So if you gave me the opportunity to talk to some famous person that lives out in California, that's great. But one of the parameters to put on myself is I would like them in the room. Because I've had some people say, yes, can we do it over Zoom? And I'm like, are you going to be in the area? Meaning this is someone that probably could be in the area or people that could be in the area. And then it just gets harder to solidify a time. So I'm just like, you know what? No big deal. It just won't work out because I really want people. I really want to do it face to face. I guess that's I maybe. I don't know. I try to have. I don't know. I think maybe some other stuff I could do is be more well rounded and research on certain aspects, and then bring on people with those topics. But I find if I do 137 of them, I'm always typically 50% of the people, you know, and me and you 50%. I bring the same background to every single conversation. Now you having a different background than my last guest or my future guest is going to tailor the story. And I only have so many stories, so sometimes I repeat because there's a lot of themes. But I don't know. I guess. Diversifying people possibly, meaning going out of the area slightly, but maybe diversifying my knowledge base to have a better knowledge where then I can ask somebody a deeper conversation or go more in depth on a certain thing. One of the things I'm not great at is current events, partly by design, partly by I don't really know what's going on in the world right now on on a macro or micro scale because I just choose not to. I have too much stuff going on that, like I have a few focuses in my life, and that's what I focus on every day. And I don't read newspapers. I don't watch news. I probably should be a little more up to speed on that because a lot of people can have good conversations about the world or policies. And I try not to do politics, but I think politics that sometimes brings out good talking points depending on what they are. Not argumentative, but more of like learning.
Well, some of your guests are politics oriented, so it's going to naturally come out in those conversations. I think that's probably one of the strong suits is that you don't drive a conversation. You're not trying to solve something. You don't come in and say, well, today we're going to talk about Eastern European medical philosophy. It's like, well, some crazy off weird thing that none of your listeners have a reference to. Everything that I think the podcasts that I've listened to, and I've listened to a few, it's always something that connects them to you and to the community. And that's very powerful. We just don't have a lot of outlets like that. And if you don't, say you turn on the TV set into the local TV stations, those are, the Gannett News Service. They're cooked through a certain lens, whereas this is pretty, it's pretty open, which is really a breath of fresh air.
Well, I was talking to someone earlier today, and they were talking about social media, and talking about marketing, and talking about like brand and all this. And I was like, well, if you're going to meet me on my podcast, you're going to meet me in person, you're going to meet me anywhere, if you're going to see me on video, I want someone to be like, no, that's Galen. Like, that's Galen. That's Galen. And what I don't want to do is act different here than I would if I was at, an event tonight, or if I go home, or if I see you on the street, or if I see you anywhere, I still want you to be like, no, that's still Galen. Like, he still acts the same, Now, maybe I talk a little bit different on the podcast because I'm in a situation where it brings out longer conversation than a quick story, but at the end, or a joke or something. But at the end of the day, I don't want anybody to come on here and be like, man, he just didn't seem like the guy that I was expecting. Or people come on and be like, oh, that was really good. They don't know me, but then if they start to see me in other places, like, no, that's kind of the same dude. Being authentic, and then I don't like if things are too polished, and I find, like, what do you always focus on when things are too polished? Look at anybody, whether they're political or whether they're the perfect example is when you have somebody that comes out speaking on behalf of a company or speaking on behalf of the government or speaking on behalf, and they come out and it's so like teleprompter. There's no movement in their voice. I say all the time. I ramble. I stumble. I question. I look up a lot, and it's not because I'm like can't make eye contact. A lot of times I'm just thinking. I'm like, what the heck was I thinking about? And I mean, I know my nuances, but I don't pull them off the camera. So 99% of the videos I've ever put out are one take. Because I'm like, I want it to be on the. Now I might start something and be like, crap, what was I? No, scratch that, because I like totally like messed up what I was wanting. Not because the delivery was bad. It was like I just kind of went off top. I'm like, let me just get the message. But the actual message itself, most of my videos, I stumble, I stammer, I like, sometimes I'm like, man, well, yeah, this, and then they're like, I forgot, it's this, but I like that in there because you watching it are like, that's a real person, not canned. Well,
that's part of authenticity, is to see the mistakes on the edges, to see the sort of, oh, he stumbled there. Well, I probably would stumble in the same situation, and that's sort of that human connection, and that's really nice. And those polished, sort of monster robots out there who just rattle off the exact same language every time. I mean, that's the reason we react to it, is because it's inhuman. It's not real in some respect. They're not being themselves. You are being yourself, whether you're here or out showing a house or out playing with the kids. It's the same Galen across that.
And I think when you talk about talking, or where he got like the gift of gab or whatever, it's like I don't know. I think a lot of it is the stripped down nature of it, bringing out talking to people is beneficial for a lot of reasons, but at the end of the day, I can get the authentic Scott. I can get and if I was to, I've seen plenty of things especially when it comes to, whether it be TV or social media, and someone's too polished. Then I look at them like, you know what? They might be great, they might be good, but then this person looks more fun. And then that fun person and that person know the same, but this guy's more fun. I'm going with that one. And that's what I found. I've been able to, over the last handful of years, kind of, go from young, kind of I say uneasy, but not confident because I didn't know what I was really talking about, or I was second guessing if I knew what I was talking about, because I was in the world of adults now, and I was, I was this like young adult coming in. I was like, man, I don't know if I can hang with these people that are 10, 20, 30 years older than me. And then I got to the point where I'm like, you know what? One is they're all people.
Yeah.
And once you hit a certain point in adulthood, everybody's trying to do the best they can. Then you start to find out that there's people that are older than you that are not as smart as you. Then you find out there's people younger than you that are smarter than you. And then you find out that, okay, we're all kind of on the same, we're all just a mixed bag.
Yep.
And then I just got to the point where I didn't, at least in my business, I hit a certain point where I knew what I was talking about. And at that point I had the confidence where I'm like, well, I can hang with all these people.
Yeah.
And at that point I can just be myself, because I don't have to sit there and like second guess myself. Man, am I making a fool of myself, or I can't come to the table? And even now, if I find that I'm in and above my head in knowledge, I have enough humility and I have enough background to say I don't know, and I don't feel like I'm letting someone down, and be like, hey, listen, I'll shoot you straight. Don't know it. Hey, this person will. Let me make a connection.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing that you, and I think a lot of us go through this. It's like you don't care about your audience, but you do care about your audience. But this is about you and your experience, and that's a big difference. A lot of people, and you hear that on podcasts, they're producing content for other people. You're producing content for you and for the people that are on here. And it's
me and you right now.
And it really shows up. And that level of authenticity is fantastic because of that. That's why people want to listen to it.
When I think the first podcast I did, I thought about people listening for about the first 10 minutes, maybe 20. And then it just got really normal. Yeah. And then in my second podcast, third podcast, I got to the point where I'm like, you know what? It's way more fun just to talk to somebody. Yeah. I mean, I'm aware that I have a mic in front of me. I'm aware I have headphones in front of me. So it's not the same as if we're sitting at the coffee shop having a coffee on just a table.
Yeah.
But for the most part, the conversation's going to be the same.
Yep.
Now, there might be certain details I don't address to everybody if I was to talk to you and name drop or say something just out of like privacy reasons. But man, I very rarely censor anything I say on this. Yeah. And the other thing is, like, with no agenda, I don't know what I'm going to say a minute from now.
Yeah.
No clue. I don't know what I'm going to say 10 seconds from now, to be honest. It just kind of spews out of my head. And then you say something, and that triggers something else. I'm like, well, let's just go there.
Just go. Exactly.
There hasn't been one thing I've ever said on the podcast that I've regretted or taken out either. Yeah. Everything, I've never edited anything I've ever said on a podcast, because it's just it's authentic. I just like spew it out and let's just roll with it.
That's it.
It's how many podcasts have you done now? Have they all been with me, or have you done others?
I did a couple with Paul, and
I thought so. Yeah.
And then 3? This makes number 3 with you.
3? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's about it. I love talking, and I love talking on podcasts. And the pandemic has really, I listened to a lot of podcasts over the past year. And I think it's pushed a lot of people who maybe were forced to spend more time at home or alone or in smaller groups. I think the idea of now that things are opening up, I want to go out and have conversations with other people. The podcasts were just a salve on an open wound that didn't get addressed for a year. And part of it is like being in a situation where you're in a room and you're relaxed and you can talk about whatever, and people are not going to judge you. They may judge you and you just don't give a shit. But I think the pandemic has really put a focus on that, our need as humans to have conversation and to have that feedback, that back and forth.
It was weird. As soon as everything kind of started to open up and you didn't have to wear a mask in all places going in, I walked in the grocery store the other day, and I started to leave my car. I'm like, well, let me grab my mask.
Yeah.
And I started like walking in. I like kind of glanced, and it was like 50-50. And I was like, this is weird, but like I'm just gonna do it. And I like walked through with no mask. I'm like, it was weird how in a year and a half time span we went from they got masks, they're weird, to all of a sudden like, wait, they don't have masks. And to think about a 15-month span, or so, and that our perception and just what we thought was normal completely shifted to the point where, and I've thought about this a few times, like how quickly does something become a cultural norm? Mm-hmm. That might have been the fastest I think I've ever seen.
Oh, I don't think cultural norms can happen very rapidly when you're incentivized. Think of it. You could go travel overseas to Asia and people wear masks all the time.
Yeah.
That is not uncommon. Whereas for us in Western civilizations, very uncommon until now. Mm-hmm. Now you see people with a mask on, no big deal.
Yeah.
And in fact, people without masks in certain places like grocery stores or hospitals suddenly becomes really odd. And but I think that's part of our evolution of culture is shifting to accommodate that.
Yeah.
And there was I've seen photos and read some stories about after the flu epidemic in 1918, and where mask wearing was really a norm for a long time after that, and then it slowly fizzled out as there wasn't a need for it.
How long did that go for? The mask wearing. Because the flu was a few years.
It was a few years, yeah. They went, because they kept having wave after wave of additional infections and people dying.
It must have been like what, immigrants coming in? Waves of immigrants or no?
Well, no, it's just like where we had the waves here last year. So you had
like spikes and stuff?
Spikes and stuff. It was the same thing, depending on the region, where you're at, sort of what was happening in that particular geographic area.
Do you know how long they had masks on, though?
Oh, it was a while. The article I read, I want to say, I don't remember.
My guess would probably be 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, it was a bit. A couple of interviews I've heard with specialists in culture and changes, historians, said that right now it's going to take us a year to really get out from under the cultural shift of being separated from other people. And he said, 2023, it's going to be like the 1920s. It's going to be, hedonism and craziness, because all of that will be, all those restrictions will be gone, and it'll be out of our system. There will be, because right now we're sort of in the hangover from it.
So I ordered tickets to one of my favorite bands a couple of days ago, and I was so excited. I love live music. I haven't heard live music. I actually went to a concert at Higher Ground in February of 2020.
Yeah.
And I think it was Valentine's Day or right around that time. A month later, we were shut down. Yeah. And it was crazy because I went to that, didn't think twice of it. Yeah. Everybody's just hanging out, normal concert going scene. The concert I'm going to is also at Higher Ground, and I'm like, this is it's gonna be weird, but I'm so ready just to go listen to music. And just
you're
chill.
Bookending the pandemic with two concerts. That's
and it's same place, and I'm just looking forward to and we have a few people going, and there's a group of 8 of us going. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go now. Let's go, because I think we're just we've been kept in so long that going to see that sporting events, just going back to kind of normal functions, even seeing people and people being more apt to just shake hands is awesome. It's just, it's weird, but you go from so long of just waving, and then you start maybe fist pumping, and now you're shaking hands and hugging, and it's okay, it's nice to kind of get back to normal human interaction a little bit, but
long overdue. I have a sort of a last summer I had that trip to go to the Tetons, and we changed it. Instead of flying because of the risk of infections, we drove across the country, and seeing that was really eye-opening, because that was the depths of everything being locked down. And then we get in the three of us get in a car.
Was it April or May?
This was August.
Oh, was that long? Okay.
Yeah.
So about a year ago?
So about
Tetons are in...
the Tetons.
Tetons? That's California?
No, it's Wyoming.
Wow, okay, I'm really off. What is it Tahoe? No, what's...
Tahoe's in California.
Okay, I'm getting my national parks all mixed up. Okay, so Wyoming?
It's just south of Yellowstone.
Okay. So. Yellowstone is in Wyoming also?
Yeah.
In Montana?
I think it crosses both, I think.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah. I'm not super up on where things lie out there. So, but it was a fantastic trip. But seeing the changes from, New York, and also I traveled with, a medical professional, and it was I got scolded a lot, wash your hands more, put the, you need to wear your mask in there. And so she kept me on my toes, Stacy Carter Kelly. But the trip was interesting, seeing the sort of cultural differences of how they were handling it. As you got farther and farther west, you saw the loosening of the social norms of it was, we would stop for gas in the middle of Kansas, and there would be nobody in the town with a mask on. Mm-hmm. Yet we had just come from New York, where it was raging here, and nobody was leaving their houses, and it was completely different. And it was you really see the cultural divide in our country, even then. This was, in August.
Well, I went to Texas. I went to Texas and Florida in April of this year. That was before everything opened. Was starting to open up, and down there it was just very loose, and those were one of the two looser areas. But it was weird. You go from one extreme to the other, and again you see the same thing. It's 50 states. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing,
Yeah.
Like my sister in Florida, she's like, man, like nobody has masks on. Like if you go in and like stores and stuff, like some do. You went to the grocery store and about 50-50, and this was like 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And now we've just gotten to that point. But it's, no, it's it's called the Tetons?
The Tetons, yeah.
Tetons.
Yeah.
How big is that national park?
It's huge. Massive.
I saw something that, and I don't know if this is true. It must be true. It was on a graphic.
Yeah.
So it was on the internet. It must be true. But we saw this. The Adirondack Park can house like multiple national parks.
Yes.
And I always think of like Yellowstone or Yosemite or is it Arcadia?
Arcadia in Maine.
Yeah. In Maine. I always think of those that, especially the ones out west, like these things are massive. They're so much bigger than the Adirondacks, and you realize, like, no, the Adirondacks are huge.
Yeah.
So when you go to these places, and again, when I think of the Adirondacks, like you can drive from one side to the other in a couple hours. So it's like it's big, but it's not like insurmountable.
But it's contiguous, but it's also there's a high population density in New England, more so than in the West. In the West, things are so far apart. And also, the mountains are taller. And, it's the continent. You're at the edge of the continental divide. So it's dramatic, just dramatic. And I think the sense of the space out there, because of the expanse of it, is so much greater. It feels much bigger.
Now, how does like out there, national parks, how does it relate to the Adirondacks? The trees as dense. You said the mountains are taller. Because this is older. The Adirondacks are considered an older mountain range.
It's very different. Different set of trees and stuff. I mean, we hiked, we stayed in, I forget the name of the little town right outside of where the park was. But we were at 5,000 feet in the town. And then you go hiking up into it. So the baseline elevation out there for just in the valleys of the mountains is almost a mile high. So
when you get to the top of the mountain, it is like clear air.
Oh yeah, it was clear in the valleys. I was shocked at how much the altitude impacted physical performance. It really was. Thank God, Stacy said, let's plan a couple days to acclimate, sleep and get some rest before we went hiking. And
so when you go up to higher elevations, it's harder to breathe, right?
It's harder to breathe. Yeah, you get tired easier.
Is it because it's less oxygen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Less oxygen. And Stacy, we brought a pulse oximeter for our fingers, and we were at night when we were having dinner, we'd see who had the lowest or highest numbers. And here you can sit down and be at 100%, 90% oxygen in your body. The highest any of us had up there was 70.
Wow.
80%. It was that big of a difference.
So I always think like when they go play at Denver. Yeah. And you get the guys like breathing oxygen on the sidelines.
Absolutely.
Because they're at Mile High, so 5280, right? So so when you go hiking up, how's the terrain and like the Adirondacks is a very dense mountain, right? Mountain range? Or is it a bit similar?
It's kind of hard. It's just very different. It's different rock formations, different kinds of trees. There are much fewer trees. Here it's much more dense. So like when you're hiking, if you go to Mount Marcy or Algonquin or Mount Wright or something, you're deep in a forest on a trail for hours at a time. Mm-hmm. Out there, you were in the forest for a very small amount of time. A lot of the trails were up on the crests of buttes and overlooks. You're in valleys where there are no trees along whole sections, and you see that in the photos I shot. You'll see that as well. Lots of craggy cliffs and rolling sort of meadows with birds and flowers and stuff, but very few trees. So you get these dramatic expanses. Plus the sort of plateaus we hiked up this one area called Death Canyon. And we hiked up, camped, then hiked up on top of the plateau that was on the top edge of the canyon. It was another couple thousand feet up. And then from there, you had these views out to the west where you could see 30, 40 miles out.
So the views were better on the hike. Because the Adirondacks, you hike up, a lot of times you're just looking at trees.
Yeah. Because the views aren't better. It's sort of, they're
different.
They're different. They're just fundamentally different. Much more open.
Yeah. Because I always find when I go, I would love to go hiking out there. I never really get excited to go in the Adirondacks. And I have hiked a little bit. And I know you've done a lot of hiking. I always find I probably should because it quiets my mind a little bit. But sometimes when I get more than a half hour, 40 minutes up, I get really bored.
Yeah.
And then I get at the top and like it looks good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I appreciate it as much as other people. And part of me's I get down and I always have the same thought when I get down. Like, why did I just waste time going up and down? So I obviously don't find enough of why people do it. But I mean, I get why people like doing it. I always find that I don't get the satisfaction out of it. It's kind of the same thing. Like, do I want to go sit on a beach and relax, or would I rather be like thinking and doing? And I'd rather sit inside and do a puzzle, to be honest, and sit on the beach and like scold in the hot sun. So, but I think for me, it's just the entertainment factor where, I mean, the conversation with people is good and that, but I'm like, man, I could do the same, like me, I could do the same thing probably on a golf course, or I could probably do the same thing, just doing like some yard work and then feel like I accomplished something. But I definitely get why people hike, because I know a lot of people that are the 40. You're not a 46er, or are you?
Nope. I'm about halfway done. So
you plan on doing that?
Oh, maybe. It's not a goal of mine. If I hiked all 46 of them, it'd be great. I've done all the tough ones, taking pictures. So
of course you have.
That makes it a lot easier to do the other half.
It's such a Brightwell thing to say. Well, I started with the hardest first, and then I just like...
Well, it's funny. The very first one I did, Stacy called me. She goes, "Hey, on Father's Day or June 21st, do you want to come hike Mount Allen?" I'm like, "Sure, I'll do it." Get up at 4 a.m, be there at 5, hike all day, and come back. And then afterwards, I'm like, "Well, that was grueling and nasty. Let's do it again." And I'm like, "She's like, that's the hardest one there is." And I'm like, "Really?" I'm like,
"Really?
Fantastic."
What is it, Mount Allen?
Mount Allen. Well, that's the one that most people feel is the least exciting, because it's like a super long hike in through water and mud, and then you have this steep climb to a pretty mediocre view, and then you have to turn around and do it all back again.
I think I would actually enjoy the water part, because that's exciting to me. It's like when you just sit there and like walk, it's like dirt, rock, tree, dirt, rock, tree. I mean, there is, I do get something, like we went up, my sisters were up, both of them, and we went to go hike this. I'm like, we want to go hiking. I said, great. So we did like this little mountain that we were to the top in like 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, wait, start to finish, I can go up, do my thing, get down. We're going to probably spend no more than an hour and 15 minutes on there. Then we just go get lunch and have a beer. And I'm like, I'm in. Yeah. Because I got more out of, like, it was good. I got like the hike in, but it was like an hour. I'm like, I'm good. Like
Well, I find in some of these, like, the conversations we have along the way are amazing, because it's like a podcast.
Yeah.
Same 3 or 4 people, but you're going to be doing it for 8 hours. You might as well talk about something. But also there's a meditative quality where you get in your mind and you start, thinking about things in your life. And because it's somewhat strenuous, some of the hikes we started at 11 o'clock at night to be in the summit at sunrise. There is nothing to see at 11 o'clock at night to 5 a.m. in the middle of a forest. And so you have to be comfortable with yourself in that respect. But doing it with other people is definitely the way to go.
I think at some point I think I should do it. I think do you meditate at all?
No.
I always find that I don't know if I'd be good at it, but I find that times I probably should, or times where I just have to like relax and just like I said, I'm almost right now trying to slow my life down a little bit.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is for the clarity. It's for the thinking. It's the headspace. It's the flow state. It's like I need to take a little bit off my plate and just focus, and kind of almost like take a step back, scan everything, and be like, okay, now we can go down this path. And it's weird. I've never had to do this before, but it's noticeably a challenge right now. It's noticeably needed, and it's also a challenge for me right now. Yep. So a lot of that is something that it's tough, but it's like another thing I'm just diving into. But climbing up a mountain probably would help me. Yep. Would be a good thing.
Are you doing long workouts?
No.
All right, there you go. Because
I would not be like in the shape to. I mean, I could get up. I would do it, but it's like.
Well, what I'm saying is like Paul and Coda and I.
Paul workout, yeah.
Yeah. So our workouts, the shortest ones are 20 minutes. And then they just go on, like the one we're training for in August. Did Paul tell you about that one?
No. I saw Coda the other day. He said you guys were doing you guys ran out in the humidity one night, and he goes, it was just like, he came back and was just like sweating.
Oh, yeah, sweating. So we've been doing a lot of trail runs, like run up the mountain and then run down as fast as you possibly can. Well, I run down as fast as I possibly can. They run down safely. Either I found it or Scott or Craig, someone found it and forwarded it to Paul. This guy on YouTube had said, I'm going to run 1 mile every hour for 24 hours. And then we thought about that, and we're like, oh, we got to do it. I'm coming. This is going to come full circle in a second. So I failed running an ultra a couple years ago. So what we were thinking
Ultra's how many miles? 100 and...
over 26. Anything over a marathon is considered an ultra.
Oh, okay.
So a bunch of us went and tried to run one in New Hampshire. It was 30 some odd miles. Coda was the only one who finished. And I think he did it just in pure anger and spite.
That also sounds like a Coda thing.
Yeah, it sounds like a Coda. But this one, we're like, well, why don't we just start at Paul's house and we'll just run 1 mile every hour for 24 hours. And we got to thinking about it. That's like fun. Maybe I'll do 2 miles an hour and try and get my ultra in. I would do 48 miles in 24 hours. And you have to think about it. It's a very different kind of workout. It's like, all right, so I can run a mile in 8-9 minutes.
Wait, you've done this?
Not yet. I'm going to this fall, though.
Local or at an actual race?
Local. We're just going to do it.
This is just something you guys are training to do one night?
Yeah. And so a lot of the things that we're training for is that long grind, because the backside of that is you get that sort of euphoria, but your body responds very differently, like meditation. It's like, I go spend a 45-minute workout, doing thrusters and running 400s for 40 minutes. And then when I sit down after dinner, and it's like my body is at one with the world, totally calm.
Because your body gets in a flow state.
Exactly.
So,
and with age, it's gotten much easier, and it's harder to
get in the flow state.
It's easier to get in the flow state,
okay.
But it's also, it's harder to sprint. And bodies get old; they break down. So those kinds of long, grindy sort of workouts just are a sweet spot as I have become an older athlete.
How many hours do you think it would take if you were running? Because in my eyes, running a mile every hour, I would deem would seem more than doable.
Oh yeah,
and I don't want to I'm really just thinking about it. Like even if you ran a relatively slow 9 to 10 minute mile, because it's just a mile. Like
yep.
You could walk it and you'd be
you can walk it in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Think about that. You could walk a mile. Now the difference is your recovery. How are you going to handle? How are you going to keep from getting cold?
Yeah,
that's stiff.
That was where I was thinking.
It's a very different mindset.
And the sleep aspect.
Oh yeah.
Because at some point you start seeing things because like you're middle of the night and you're like.
But we're all well versed in Ragnars, so we've done enough of those that it shouldn't be a problem. So we'll keep.
But if you go to
up.
2 miles an hour, that changes the game a bit.
Completely.
Because then you go and you're trying to finish. I would deem probably sub 20 at that point, which is already, and again, that's a lot of pounding. And then all of a sudden, it's like, I would think it's going to take you 20 minutes to at least to 25 just to come down from the run.
Yep.
And then at that point, you're getting like the butterflies. I got to go back out.
Got to go back out and do it again.
Because 1 mile, you kind of do it, and you can almost sit and like hang out for 40 minutes and be like,
yep.
Oh, we got to go what in 5 minutes? Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Yep. So it's interesting. So what do you do for that 40 minutes? So it's like, maybe put on Star Wars, the whole series, and watch it all night or something, or, grill out, or, maybe, do you jump in the hot tub, or maybe you don't want to get that loose in between your runs.
Actually, a movie idea sounds probably like the best, because then it almost feels like you're still like in a state where if like every hour you just did something different.
Yeah.
It'd be kind of like, oh, hot tub. Next hour I'm going to do that. And I don't think you get into a flow where you're just like, run, come back, watch a series. Run, come back, watch an episode. And then you kind of just get in this back and forth.
Yep.
I think that might be easier, especially if you're on... Like, I remember when I watched Ozark, like, I was in it.
Oh,
and I don't watch a lot of series, but... have you seen Ozark?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you just start, like, watching it, and you just start
binge. It's like Breaking Bad. Once you get into it, you can't stop.
But it puts you at a certain level of, like... comfort or a certain level of just like familiarity when you're just watching this episode over and over again. So I think that would happen if you were running.
Yeah.
The 2 miles.
2 miles
to me, even though it's double the run, the impact is greater than double.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that. But see, then you do 48. Now, you might as well run 2 more and do 50.
Oh yeah, I know you'd say yeah.
Of course.
The last one you just do up here. It's 4 miles.
You can't help
last
it.
Last hour you got 4 miles.
Well, that's one of the things we keep debating about. Do I run those 4 miles in the first 2 hours? The extras. That way I can tail off overnight and run less and less so that it's less pounding on your body.
So you'd almost do like a floating 2 miles. You just have to have it done within the 24 hours.
So yeah, but the thing is, you have to start. Everybody starts at the top of the hour at the same time. So if it takes you 25 minutes to run 2 miles and it takes me 8 minutes to run 1 mile, we both have done our hour's worth of running. But so we're trying to figure out. So if I did 2 miles every hour, and then for 2 hours I do 3 miles, and then I can go to 2 again, and then maybe do 1
to hit that 50.
To hit the 50.
Wait, so you would say you just have to have 50 hours in 24 hours.
50 miles in 24
or 50
hours.
miles in 24 hours. So it doesn't even have to be 2 miles an hour. It just has to average out to 2 miles and
exactly.
So you could say, I'm going to just take a nap for this hour, and next hour I'm just going to run 4.
Yeah, but
at some point, I don't think that's a good strategy.
Well, I was thinking like, okay, so if this hour I have to run 1 mile, and the next hour I have to run 1 mile, why don't I start at the 50-minute mark, run my mile, start the next hour, run my mile, and then I get a big long chunk of time off.
Can you do that?
I don't know. We haven't.
Okay, I was going to wonder if you said at the start of every hour, then it's.
But that's the way it had to start. If you don't start your run at the top of the hour, you fail.
So it's like when you're doing an EMOM, like a CrossFit EMOM,
exactly.
And say it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Say let's do 10, easy numbers, and it's a pretty tough number to hit. Well, you start on the minute every single time, and by the time you hit minute 9, like it's done. Yeah. Because minute 10, I can do it at the 30-second mark, and I get an extra 30-second break. Exactly. So it's always that little cheat. Like you just got to get to that last one, because then you can milk that last round a little longer, because you don't have the 11th minute, and that's. I get what you're saying though, because you would have to. It's a weird.
Yeah. But that's part of the challenge is you want to keep it interesting. We've had some Ragnar runs where I can think of one in particular. I had a 2.3 mile run. And it took me 45 minutes because I was so injured from other runs and had no sleep and hadn't eaten well, and I just bonked on the run, and I essentially just about walked it. And I came in, I was sort of a little hallucinatory, and I was a little sort of out of it, and so it's the miles will catch up with us at some point, and it's like how do you plan for that? And
could you do? I'm not going to say it because you would do it. Could you just do one where there's no time limit?
Yeah.
But I'm saying you do it every hour until you just can't do it anymore.
You give up, yeah.
And either you fall asleep or, you know what I mean? Like you could just say like, oh, I fell asleep and missed my alarm to get up.
Yeah. Possibly. But...
I would start with the 24 first
to
see.
Well, there is a race out there. Is it Courtney DeWalter? She and another guy were finishing it. It's very similar. It's like every hour you have to, or every X number of minutes you have to run a 5K, and you just keep doing it until one person stops, until there's only one person left.
Well, there was a couple guys I saw that did a hero workout every hour on the hour for a day.
Yeah. And
you pick whatever one, but a lot of those are longer workouts.
Yeah.
And that doesn't require I would think running you can pace yourself, but like okay, I got to lift a certain weight. Yeah. Yeah. You can't really pace that. Like you still have to do that physically that work.
No, and that's it.
So you can't lift it slow. You could walk slower or run slower, but you can't lift it slower because you might have to take that full force to get it up.
Exactly. No, the hero workouts. That's definitely an interesting concept to do one every hour for a day.
I forgot. I think the people I saw do it. I forgot who it was. I want to say it was out in Boston area, and they did it. It might have been on Memorial Day or something. Yeah. Like they ended up doing something like that. There's a race. It was on Netflix a few years ago, and I forgot the name of the document.
The Barkley.
That's it. Did you do that?
I have not done it, but
it's in Tennessee.
Yeah, I have run portions of it. So my grandmother,
the actual trail.
The actual trail.
Okay.
So my grandmother.
It's called what? The Barkley.
The Barkley, in a little town called Wartburg, Tennessee,
which is right outside Knoxville.
Yeah, right outside. Yeah, it's between.
Is it near Oak Ridge?
Yeah, it's right outside of Oak Ridge.
So my family, I have family in Oak Ridge, and when I was watching the documentary, they started saying oh, we're right. I'm like, it's right, and nobody knows about this race.
Yeah. So
the locals probably don't even know about it.
No, they don't. Like when I visited my grandmother, who is in Wartburg, and I was like, yeah, Gina and I are going to go run a section of the Barkley over near Brushy Mountain. There's a state penitentiary there. And she's like, the Barkley, what is that? And I'm like, it's this crazy trail race. And so I had to explain it to her, and she's like, did not get it. But Yeah, it's
What is
way
it?
in the mountains.
It's 5 laps. You have to do, it's 1 lap clockwise, 1 counterclockwise, 1 in the day and night. So you have to do 2 clockwise runs, 1 day, 1 night, 2 counterclock, 1 day, 1 night, and I think the 5th one is something else.
Yeah, I don't remember all the rules. Having to pick pages out of books and bring them down to
that's
prove
how they knew
you made
you did it.
Yeah.
It's like they gave you a book number and said they scattered books around, but they might say you're page 21, so you'd have to rip out all the 21 pages.
Yep.
21, the page number 21 out of
from
every
every book.
Yeah. Which is a genius idea.
Yeah.
Did you watch? You said you didn't watch the documentary?
Oh yeah, I've seen the
Oh
documentary.
yeah, it's crazy. And
It's crazy.
And it's just like, we just park at this gate and
The Yellow Gate. It's when we were there were a lot of people training for it. There were like runners who were camping out and just running. The trails are beautiful. It's a spectacular
I would
place.
love to read. I'd love to watch it again to get the whole rules. But like when the year they did the documentary, 3 people finished, and they said like there's only like an X amount of people that have ever finished this.
Yeah.
And I forgot. I think it's 5 loops around, and I know it has to do with clockwise, counterclockwise, day and night. But if there was a 5th one, and I forgot what the 5th one was. That might have just been like you get to take a pick, but it was something crazy about it. It was pretty outrageous.
Yeah, it was great. I'm about to sneeze. Excuse
No,
me.
you're good. So the Barkley. Yeah, I forgot what the name was. It called the Barkley? I think. No, it's fine. Okay, there you go. I don't remember. I thought it was something different, or the hardest race in the world. It was something.
Yeah,
weird
the Barkley
name.
Marathon. The Barkley. I thought it was always called that, but
No, I mean the name of the documentary.
yeah, I
So
think
the
it's
Barkley, you're spot on.
yeah, but it's it's the hardest race in the world or something like that. It's got a funny little name to it.
And it was because I just remember like people sleeping, but then they're like, no, you got to go up and run because you had to do it in a certain time period.
Yeah,
and, like,
yeah.
The time it took to go around one loop was like a
Yeah.
long time. So it was like you had some buffer time, but it was enough to like get like dry socks and dry shoes on and go back out again.
Yep.
I don't know. It was bizarre.
But to have a time limit, I mean, really, you have to run at a certain pace, and that's a killer. And 5 miles on trails in the forest at
especially
night,
up and over.
It's easy to get lost. There you go, you're done.
And that's what I think a lot of people were. They got lost and couldn't make
Yep.
it back in the time period. And like
That's
because
it.
you had to run. I wouldn't deal in perfect race, but
Yeah.
a pretty darn close to your pathway.
And it's easy to get off trail. Easy. It's very similar. Those trails are almost identical to the Adirondacks. So
And I think that, and I obviously ran it, but I think the route you run is the same route. It just depends on if you run it day and night in reverse or forward.
Yep.
It was actually, again, it was like the CrossFit Games this past year when they had them all run down and they got down, like, now you got to run back. And they never told them about that.
That was
like,
great.
Oh, crap. And,
That was great.
But I think like some of that stuff is just insane. Like that would have been right up your alley. You'd have been like, yes, only halfway done the race. Let's go. I would have passed out right there and then I'm out. DQ me. I'm
man.
done. Well, Scott, wrap it up here.
Perfect.
I don't want to
This
hit
is
the
perfect.
340 to be respectful to our
Yeah. Well, we can do it again.
to our genus.
I
Yeah.
love this.
That's it. We get the knowledge bomb from Scott. I didn't even get to ask you all your. I'm sure you did some stuff over COVID that you got into even more so than.
all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, so-
macro photos and shit. We'll do that next
Yeah,
time.
sounds good. All right, Scott, I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Episode 137, Galen Trombley Show. Thanks for listening to the Galen Trombley Show. If you want to reach me, you can go on Facebook at Galen Trombley, on Instagram at Galen Trombley, and on YouTube at Galen Trombley. The spelling, GaelanTrombley.